Let me know when you're ready, Holly.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, I am ready. So we'll call this meeting to order. And this is the city council meeting on Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. And do we want to waive the rules or do the call to order first, Matt?
Sorry, I call to order and then waive the rules.
Okay, last time I think we did it in reverse, so that's why I'm checking. So go ahead and take the roll call, Holly, if you would, please. Or we'll call it to order, okay. And then I would look for a motion to consideration and possible action regarding suspending the council rules regarding being physically present for the city council meetings.
I make that motion, Your Honor.
Thank you, Alderperson Boersma, and a second by Alderperson Schumacher. Any discussion on that? I hope not, otherwise we can't meet tonight. Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Okay, that takes us to the roll call.
Boersma,
Here.
Caravello,
Here.
Doom,
Here.
Eiley,
You're in my basement.
Hirsch,
Here.
Hunt,
Here.
Jensen,
Here.
Lagaki,
Here in the parlor with a tablet.
Majewski. Alder Majewski,
He was on.
Reeves,
Here.
Riley,
Here.
and Schumacher.
Here in the billiard room with Colonel Mustard.
All right, there are 11 alders present. I think I saw Alder Majewski on here. Maybe he just got cut out.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of communications that I'd like to share before we get started. The first one is, in the last few weeks, Stoughton has lost two of our community leaders. Carol Walleen was the mother of Stoughton Trailers, and Jerry Treeloff, our former police chief. Carol served the community as well as her family for many years, and gave back to the community in many different ways. She was on the board for Edgewood College, the Stoughton Area Community Foundation, the United Way of Dane County, the Very Special Arts Wisconsin. In 1999, Carol and Don established the Walleen Foundation, which has been very generous to many organizations here in Stoughton. Carol was the Citizen of the Year in 2000 and received Edgewood's Distinguished Service Award. Carol and Don were 1995 sent to my king and queen, so she'll be missed. Jerry served the community in numerous ways, including to become Stoughton's chief of police in 1956. He was a police officer in 1956 and a chief of police from 76 to 84. And after Chief Treeloff retired, he became a bailiff for Dane County Court System for 13 years. And I believe that Chief Leck might have some comments that he may want to add for former Chief Treeloff.
Yeah, thank you. Jerry was, as you said, police chief during the late 70s and early 80s. Jerry also had the distinction of living to almost 96 years old, which is phenomenal, and what a great life. Very nice man, did a lot for the community, continued to be active even in his retirement. After he was done bailiffing, I know he was doing delay at the Stoughton Hospital for many years, and was very active up until just shortly before he died, and he will be greatly missed. And I was honored to call Jerry my friend. He actually hired me for my first stint in Stoughton in 1984. But unfortunately, I didn't work for him because he retired before I actually started duty. So had that distinct honor with Jerry, and we became friends over the years, and just a very nice man.
Mayor? Mayor Swadley?
Alderperson Boardman? Yes.
Yeah, we missed about 30 seconds of your discussion about Carol.
Oh, which part?
Just the first part. You cut out.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, Carol was the mother of Stoughton Trailers, I had mentioned, and she served the community on many boards throughout the year, including Edgewood College, Stoughton Community Foundation, United Way, Very Special Arts. And then her and Don established the Wallane Foundation. Carol was Citizen of the Year in 2000 and received Edgewood's Distinguished Award. And Carol and Don were also the 1995 Centennial King and Queen.
Thank you,
Thanks, Sid.
Mayor.
Sure. And then I have one other statement. Like many others, I'm deeply disturbed and saddened with what transpired in our nation in the recent days. What happened in Minneapolis and across the country is simply unacceptable. And this type of behavior and discrimination is not welcome in Stoughton. The awareness brought to our community through peaceful protesting, sharing the stories, and the initiatives proposed by our local community members provides us with a starting point and something that we can build upon. When our community focuses on specific goals, we achieve positive outcomes. Does any alders have any communications tonight? All right, hearing none, Attorney Dragney has promised me he's going to do a brief, and I repeat, brief open meetings law and ethics presentation. And I know there's quite a bit of materials available on this. This is something that we do annually, so most of you have heard this before. Obviously, things have changed a little bit with the virtual meeting, so I'll let Attorney Dragney go through his presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Swadley. If I could, I'd just like to take 30 seconds before I get into the presentation to introduce a new colleague of mine who's joining us at the meeting tonight. Her name is Rachel Snyder. I can see Rachel on my screen. I don't know if anyone else can. Rachel is a new attorney with Stafford Rosenbaum. She's been with us for about 2 weeks. She comes to us after working at the Legislative Council as a staff attorney for 5 or 6 years. Rachel is a city of Janesville resident. I believe that Rachel and her husband bought some land just outside the city of Stoughton, and so they're in the Stoughton area quite regularly, I believe. Anyway, Rachel has been a great help already. She's with us tonight because she's been helping on some of the items on the agenda tonight, and so I just wanted to introduce Rachel. So moving into the presentation, we're going to focus on the open meetings law and the ethics law tonight. I will be brief, but I'd be happy to answer questions when I'm done. So the open meetings law, in a nutshell, the open meeting law requires that meetings be preceded by public notice, publicly held in places reasonably accessible to the public, and are open to citizens at all times, unless otherwise expressly allowed by law. So that's the basic requirement. And things get a little complicated when we start trying to determine what a meeting is. Before I jump into that, I should just say this requirement applies to any governmental body. So for the city of Stoughton, that would be the city council, the plan commission, all committees and commissions and boards. So there's a two-part test to determine whether there is a meeting. One part is the number test, is the number of members of the governing body that are participating sufficient to determine the body's course of action. That could be either enough people to affirmatively pass a measure, or it could be enough people, the negative power, to prevent a measure from being adopted. I'm not going to get into all the math problems that we can do here, but it can get a little complicated when you start getting into the weeds of the numbers test. I would say there's a legal presumption in the law that if 1/2 or more of the members of a body are present, that meeting is presumed or rebuttably presumed to be a meeting, a gathering for governmental purposes, to be a meeting. It is possible to have a meeting with less than half of the members present. Again, if there's a sufficient number to determine the outcome, the numbers part of the test is satisfied. Second part of the test is this gathering for the purpose of conducting governmental business? And governmental business is defined fairly broadly. It includes, among other things, discussing matters, deciding matters, or even gathering information about matters. So, for example, if the members of a governing body want to take a field trip somewhere to gather information regarding something that's before the city, that's a meeting, and it needs to be noticed as such and accessible to the public. Let's talk about a few additional items. The concept of a walking quorum is something that we're paying a little more attention to now with the advent of electronic communications and social media. We may even have a social media discussion tonight. I'm not sure if that's on the agenda, but I know the CACP committee has been looking at social media. So a walking quorum occurs when you have a series of gatherings among individuals that collectively would satisfy the numbers test, and where the people participating are in fact engaging in governmental business. The way the Department of Justice looks at this in their compliance guide is that the essential feature of a walking quorum is that there's some element of intent or agreement among the members to be coordinating or acting together in what they're doing. So it's a series of meetings over time that are intended to engage in governmental business. A couple other examples, I call one the watering hole meeting. So a common scenario I've seen is that after a meeting, a group of members of governing body decide to go together to a local watering hole and have a drink. That's okay as long as you're not discussing governmental business. But if you are discussing governmental business and you meet the numbers test, that's a meeting. Email and social media, it's a big topic. There aren't any easy answers to this. The way the Attorney General describes the way a court would be likely to consider email, and the way I now look at social media, is that we have to look at a number of factors. The number of people who are participating, the number of communications, the time frame during which these communications are occurring, and the extent to which there's what may appear to be a conversation-like interaction between members or among members. And so when you're emailing or engaging in social media, I can't give you a real simple answer to when you're going to cross a line or not, but those are the factors that would likely be considered to determine whether there has been a meeting. And in my mind, this kind of ties in with the walking quorum discussion. So let me stop there and ask, are there any questions yet? Hearing none. Briefly, closed session. Closed session is allowed.
Counsel,
I'm sorry.
Counsel, I
Yes.
apologize. This is Riley, if I may. I actually had muted myself, so I was saying, yes, I have a question, but it could not be heard. Can I just ask something quickly, which you may not be able to answer? And that is this, with respect to email communications or phone calls, whatever the case may be, if you do not have a quorum or a sufficient number of governmental officials who could make a decision, but there is a regular contact between various government officials that is occurring by email in sequence, right? They're not all on a conference email, but they are going back and forth between, let's say, 4 members, and that would be a quorum of a committee on a particular issue. Could that trigger the open meetings law? Could that be problematic if that is being done other than in a form in which it would comply with the open meetings law? Do you understand the question?
I believe I do, and the answer is yes. I mean, it sounds like you hit the numbers test and the purpose test. Got a
Right.
sufficient number of members, and the purpose is to discuss governmental business, then would constitute a meeting.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else muted? Like to ask a question? Okay. Briefly on closed session. Closed session is allowable when there is a statutory basis to meet in closed session. If we know ahead of time that a closed session is contemplated, that does need to be noticed in the meeting agenda so the public has notice of it. It is possible to meet in closed session spontaneously when there has been no prior notice given. But if that happens, then there are limitations on reconvening an open session and taking action. Finally, with respect to voting in closed session, the Attorney General advises that votes should be done in open session unless the vote is clearly an integral part of what is authorized to be done in closed session. And there are times when we run into this issue in closed session. I have included a lot of additional information with the materials that are in the packet, including an article published by the League of Wisconsin Municipalities and the Department of Justice Compliance Guide. Those are resources you can take a look at if you're interested in more information on the open meetings law. Moving to the ethics laws, I'm going to hit just some of the highlights. A lot of this is going to seem pretty obvious. Local public officials are prohibited from using their offices to obtain anything of substantial value for the private benefit of themselves, their immediate family, or organizations with which they are associated. One of the more complicated questions we can run into is, what is an organization with which you are associated? If we find ourselves in that situation, then we can talk about what that means in more detail. One of the things that does get also a little complicated on this front is situations where you as an elected official will have an interest in a matter that is before the council, but that does not automatically disqualify. Can I ask that everyone mute themselves if you're not? Somebody, I'm getting some feedback. Caller number 3. Whoever caller number 3 is, I think, needs to mute. There we go. That's better. Thank you. So one of the things that happens as to you as elected officials is that you will find yourselves faced with having to vote on something, or where the council is voting on something where you will have an interest. But it won't be the kind of interest that would preclude you from voting. So if you are affected by something, but it affects a large class of similarly situated individuals, such as all of your constituents, and your interest in the matter is not unique or substantially different from your constituents, then of course you can vote on that. Things can change when your interest becomes highly particularized and you have an interest that is substantially different than those of other members in either the neighborhood or the city, depending on the situation. This comes up, for example, with respect to proposed development projects in a neighborhood where you may reside in the neighborhood and you and your neighbors may have concerns about it. As long as your interest is not materially different from the rest of the neighborhoods, you are allowed to vote on that without having a conflict of interest. But if your interest is unique, you may have a conflict. No person may give to you, and you may not receive as a local public official anything of value that could be reasonably expected to influence your vote or official action. When you are required to abstain from official action, the recommendation is that you should leave that portion of the meeting on that matter. In many cases, we'll see an elected official who will move from the desk where everyone or the elected officials are sitting out into the audience section, or even leave the room depending on what they how they'd like to handle that. That's the recommended approach. Finally, I'm going to mention private interests in public contracts. Public officials may not participate in making a contract in their official capacity if they have a direct or indirect financial interest in the contract. And they also may not, in their private capacity, negotiate or bid for or enter into a contract in which you have a personal financial interest if you would be authorized by law to participate in making that contract as an elected official. And this is a big one to be aware of, because a violation of that statute is actually a Class E felony. So you want to be very careful if you're, and this happens, this comes up when local officials are, for example, business owners in the community who may do business with the city government. They need to be very mindful of whether the contracts that they're entering into with the city would exceed the limitations under the statute and subject them to criminal liability. You as an elected official are able under the local code of ethics to apply to the city ethics board for an advisory opinion. If you ever have a concern or a question about how the ethics laws may apply to you, you may request an advisory opinion. Those requests must be in writing and must provide all the material facts. If you obtain such an opinion, then following that opinion is prima facie evidence of intent to comply with the law. There is a detailed article regarding ethics included in the packet. My outline that's in the packet includes additional materials relating to parliamentary procedure and the public records law. But I think given the request to keep my presentation brief tonight, I'm not going to get into those items tonight. If council wants me to address those items at some later date, let the mayor know and we can do that. Are there any other questions?
I do have one, Matt. A number of years ago, probably 5, I think, years ago, we had a discussion in one of our city councils about abstaining from a vote. And as I recall, you said something about if you're going to abstain from a vote, it's advisable to give some kind of idea to the council, other council members, as to why you're abstaining from a vote. Could you just clarify that? Because I don't know if you remember that discussion or not.
I don't specifically remember that discussion. I don't recall giving that advice. There's no legal requirement that you offer an explanation or a reason for abstaining. That's not to say you can't if you want to, but I'm not aware of any legal requirement that you do that.
Okay, it may have been with that whole issue of leaving the chamber with an abstention.
Yeah, and people abstain for a variety of reasons. In some cases, people abstain from a vote not because they're legally required, but because they believe that there is maybe an appearance of a conflict, even if not an actual conflict, and they choose to abstain. Some cases, people will choose to abstain because they have a real conflict of interest. Where there is a true conflict on a particular matter, then the advice that I would give is you shouldn't be participating in the debate over that issue. You shouldn't be voting on that issue. And the best course is to, go sit in the member of the audience while the council debates that issue.
And is that the same as recusal?
Yes, essentially.
Thank you.
Alderperson Hiley had a question or comment.
Just wanted to say that we on Community Affairs Council policy had been looking into having a social media policy for elected officials. Based on the memo that the attorney provided, we decided not to go that route because we wouldn't have really useful routes to, we don't want to constrain free speech. We don't really have useful routes to establish that sort of policy. So it is definitely, though, worth looking into the details of that memo and the attachment as well, because it's very tricky.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Attorney Dragney? All right, hearing none, we'll move on. There's a couple of proclamations tonight, and I want to thank Alderperson Legaki for taking the time to draft them. The first one reads, whereas the city of Stoughton is committed to ensuring that we are a welcoming, inclusive, and safe community for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer families, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. And whereas the month of June was designated Pride Month to commemorate the Stonewall riots in 1969, which is one of the major events that led to the LGBTQ rights movement. And whereas our LGBTQ community members contribute to the cultural fabric of our community, giving their time, talent, labor, and financial resources to supporting Stoughton. And whereas although substantial gains have been made, have been achieved, many LGBTQ community members face discrimination simply for being who they are and who they love. And whereas the struggle for dignity, equality, and LGBTQ rights continue to be important and necessary, therefore, I, Timothy Swadley, Mayor of the City of Stoughton, do hereby proclaim June 2020 as LGBTQ Pride Month in the City of Stoughton, and affirm the city's support and value of our children, adults, families, and allies of the LGBTQ community. And the second one is reads, whereas President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, declaring the slaves in the Confederate territory free, paving the way for the passing of the 13th Amendment, which formally abolished slavery in the United States of America. And whereas word about the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation was delayed for some 2.5 years to June 19th, 1865, and reaching authorities and African Americans in the South and Southwestern United States. And whereas June 19th has a special meaning to African Americans and is called Juneteenth, combining the words June and 19th, and has been celebrated by the African American community for over 157 years. And whereas we do not want to delay this declaration of freedom and justice any longer, therefore I, Timothy Swadley, Mayor of the City of Stoughton, Wisconsin, do hereby declare June 19th, 2020 as Juneteenth in the City of Stoughton, Wisconsin, and urge all citizens become more aware and reflect on the significance of the celebration in African American history and African American enduring quest for freedom and justice in our nation and city. Thank you very much for those. Minutes and reports are in the packet. Next item on the agenda would be public comment period. And we do have a few rules for public comment. And I had 4 people that signed in on the sign-up sheet, which is located on the agenda. And we're going to start with those 4. We ask that you speak for 3 minutes. And please understand that this isn't a conversation. It's an opportunity for you to express any concerns or comments that you may have, but it's not a dialogue with the city council. Certainly anything that you bring up, we can discuss when there's an agenda item to that topic, but we're not here to have a two-way conversation on this part of the agenda. So having said that, Holly is going to keep time, and then you have 3 minutes. If you run over, you may be muted, so we'll try to at least send you a chat or something to let you know that you're pushing your time, or we'll cut in. So the first person that has signed up to speak tonight is Cale Ryan. You could unmute your line and let us know what you'd like to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, me and the other downtown business owners got together and prepared a statement for tonight just to read, so I'm going to read it now. Okay. Good folks of Stoughton and the City Council, my name is Cale Ryan, and I am the owner of the restaurant Wendigo here on Main Street. We just passed our 6th anniversary at Wendigo, and we are still astonished day after day for the sense of community, generosity, and benevolence that this town has for one another and the businesses in it. We are still so thankful for everything Stoughton has given us, and I'm sure all of us business owners in town and downtown feel the same way. And that is why they were continuing to thrive and grow and add to the pool year after year. But then the entire world changed quickly, and for the last 3 months now, the city of Stoughton, the people and the business owners have done everything they can and everything asked of them to help slow down this. A lot of options were explored, and we all did what was necessary for the good of public health. We have done this all at the detriment to our way of life, and for some, our financial stability. And as we start moving forward, as responsibly and respectfully as possible, we now need to explore every option to ensure that our way of life and our financial stability can return. The council is voting tonight on a resolution to first allow for a public state of emergency, which I'm sure nobody can argue with. And then you are voting on a resolution to allow outdoor dining in our downtown as simply and as expeditiously as we can allow. And as we continue to do what it takes for the good of public health, including limiting patrons, we all know this is an option that has the potential for enormous benefit and has proven successful in places just like Stoughton. So I'm confident in all of the council members' care for this town and the people in it, and also a yes vote as well. And as the world changes again, and as it has done with unprecedented speed, we are assured the city and the council will explore all options for smart success. So I am merely here tonight to speak for us and the fellow business owners downtown, to thank you for considering all these options for all of us in Stoughton, and to let you know that we are here to work together and to do whatever it takes, hopefully with the help of the city, to ensure the survival and return of Stoughton and the downtown to the beautiful, successful, and distinguished city we believe it was and can be. Thank you for your time and your haste in this matter. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
The
guys.
next person to sign up is Josh and Kirsten Maybe, and they asked that their comments be read. And I believe the rules, and somebody remind me, really don't allow that, but I'm certainly willing to waive the rules unless there's an objection.
I move that we waive the rules.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. And I sent council members a copy of this, so you should have it. Basically, the comments say, we would like to express our support for agenda item R95-2020, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to approve the outdoor consumption permits, supporting local businesses by finding creative solutions to sustain business is critical during a global pandemic and economic recession. Expanding outdoor dining on downtown city sidewalks is a simple and cost-effective solution with minimal negative impact to the community. It has the potential to contribute to revitalization of our lovely downtown. We ask that the city to eliminate red tape and expedite the process as a way to support businesses and the community at large during this difficult time. Thank you for your consideration. All right, the next person is signed up would like to speak, and that would be Marcy. Are you still with us? I think I saw you earlier. You can unmute your line, and we'd love to hear your comments.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you to all of you for serving on the Stoughton City Council, and thank you for the special resolution condemning racial injustice and hate, and to strive for racial equity that is before you for consideration tonight. I encourage you all to vote in support of this special resolution as one of many steps we all need to take to advance racial equity in Stoughton, and in recognition of the 400 years of racially motivated practices in our country. And I noticed in the resolution that the Community Affairs Council Policy Committee will be taking this up and finding ways to work with leadership to move this policy forward, or this resolution forward. I urge that members of the group invite Stoughtonites of color to participate on this committee, or at the very least to engage them if they're not already engaged in this, and listen to them and hear their voices. I encourage the committee to consider things like the 8 policies that have been shown to reduce deaths via police practices. I encourage looking to our people of color in Stoughton, and especially our young people, for their leadership. At the protest this Saturday, I was amazed at both their leadership and the sophistication and articulate nature in which they could explain their personal experiences with racism and the systemic racism. I think we have a lot to learn from them. If there is, a time limit for when people can join that committee, or term limits, or you're only allowed to have 2 citizens or so forth, I encourage you to think of that. That's an example of a structural barrier to equity. That's an example of a structural barrier to people's participation. So I encourage you to look at things like that. And then what I want to close with is that I urge you to actively engage yourselves if you are not already engaged in a personal journey reflecting on racism in America, and that you come to it with a humble heart and a growth mindset. And I expect that of myself as well, and I'm also engaging in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and then the last person that was signed up is Ryan Vaughn. I think I saw Ryan on the call. He asked that his comments be read. I can do that, or if he would prefer to read them himself, he could. It's up to you, Ryan. And Ryan's muted, so I'm not hearing him. So I'll go ahead and read them then, unless he unmutes. The comments are, Mayor Swadley, in all, can you cover the use of force policies currently guiding the Stoughton Police Department in interaction with the community members it interacts with each day? Further, do you have any current plans to review these policies with the department, evaluate the way any of these policies or procedures have been abused, and how officers can specifically practice anti-race behaviors in their day-to-day interaction with the community members? Finally, can you create a mechanism for the widespread communication of your findings to the community, along with a forum for feedback, then plan for appropriate reform? If the current leadership is a place that is evaluating and creating steps for reform as 50% or less of BIPOC, which means Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and 50% or less is female, then can the city commit to using a more diverse and representative outside professional body to report out on these concerns? So that's what I have for public comment. If anybody else would like to speak, you certainly could do that. You would have to unmute yourself and then state your name and address. Okay, hearing none, we'll go into our next order of business, which is the consent agenda. And I would entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Motion.
I think I heard a motion. I'm not sure who I heard it from.
Yeah, that's Greg, and I'd move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, was there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderperson Reeves. Would anybody like anything removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Next item is ordinance 8 of 2020, and that comes from Stoughton Utilities, and that would be Alderperson Jensen, Would you like to introduce this?
Yes, I would. Thank you. It's Ordinance 8 of 2020 to adopt modification to subsection 74-112 and 74-113 of the City of Stoughton Municipal Code of Ordinances. And this is second reading. Utilities recommends approval on a 7-0 vote. And I would move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have Alderperson Hiley. I think it was the second. Any discussion on this?
Yeah, if I could, then just I'll invite Jill to speak on it, but this is in regard to the 2020 utilities budget.
Thank you. Actually, we budgeted 6%. So this is actually a rate increase for the wastewater rates. Budgeted 6%. Jamin, our finance director, did a lot of work on this. In the end, I think we're at 4.74%, ultimately about $1.55 per month impact to the raised rates for the wastewater side. We do anticipate, as we look out over the next several years, of additional rate cases, but actually, as far as one goes, we haven't had a rate adjustment since 2015. I'm not sure if Jamin has anything he would like to add.
No, you pretty much hit it on the head again. Just to repeat, we did have the 6% budgeted overall in the forecast, and that was actually planned to be implemented January 1st. We waited until we got through closing the year on books and performed a little bit better than we thought we would, so we were able to knock that down to about 4.75% in implementation on a July 1st date.
Are there any questions from any of the council members? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Next item is ordinance 9 of 2020, and that one comes from Stoughton Utilities. Alderperson Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's ordinance 9, 2020 to create section 74-17 of the City of Stoughton Municipal Code of Ordinances. It's related to replacement of lead water service lines. Utilities Committee approved recommendation at a 7-0 vote on May 18th, 2020, and I would move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'm not sure who seconded. I think it was President Hirsch, maybe.
Caller number 2.
Yeah, caller number 2. Is that President Hirsch?
Yes.
Okay, great. We can hear you. Awesome. Anything to add, Alderperson Jensen?
Sure. Yeah, this is something that we need. We need this ordinance in order to apply for grants to help fund for the replacement. And I think Jill can. She's got the presentation up there, so she can carry forward with a better description than I can.
Thank you, Greg. I just kind of wanted to go through a reduced version of what was, I guess, brought forward last meeting, and kind of the importance overall of this ordinance and really the plan ultimately to make Stoughton lead free. So I just want to really highlight, get this to work. There we go. Just some public outreach that we've done recently. We really wanted to make sure that this ordinance, because it is impactful, the goal ultimately would be next year to obtain grant monies to be able to pay for the the private side. There's always the potential that we may not be successful in obtaining those grant dollars. So we wanted, put forth the effort to make sure that the community was aware of what we're looking to do. And what the impact of this. And so this is just 3 different Facebook posts that we put on, and there was also a very good hub coverage of it on June 4th. So ultimately why we're pursuing this and ultimately why this is regulated is because lead has significant health impacts, particularly to young children. But those impacts then carry through their entire lives. So to highlight, the important or an interesting piece, I guess, different than sanitary sewer laterals, is that water services are actually partially publicly held and privately held. So the utility owns, or the city owns, from the water main to that shutoff valve, the curb stop, and that's all public. And then from that shutoff valve into the home is privately owned. So we've done CIP projects and done, water improvements each year. We do address that public side, but do a lot of education and are always pursuing the private side to be actually replaced at the same time. But about 80 services that were replaced last year, about 5 of those were actually done on the private side. Numbers as we know them today, and we'll continue to chew these over the next basically 6 months or so through hydro excavation, and then once we're able to get access to homes, that's COVID-19 has impacted that to some degree, but we will continue to hydro excavate and determine materials. But right now, about 15% of the community has lead services. So I think an important key piece to this as we looked forward, we actually had an exceedance, and when we had a lead exceedance in 2019, that's not really considered a violation. It's ultimately considered that there's additional action that's required to be taken. And right now, the action level is 15 parts per billion. So if we've got basically more than 10% of our samples exceed 15 parts per billion, we're now at that lead action level. A variety of different things that means is we need to do extra public outreach. But what we had looked at in the past is that we were able to sample ourselves, what we call back into compliance. So if we then went through another sampling series and were able to have less than that 10% exceed that 15 parts per billion, we would be back in compliance and not have to do these additional items. The EPA is moving that parts per billion from 15 to 10, and that puts us in a position where we will probably, it would be very almost fluke for us to be able to have less than 10% of those samples exceed 10 parts per billion. The other thing that's now required is that if we do the work on the public side, the private side also has to have the lead service replaced at the same time. Some additional things that I guess aren't particularly noteworthy is that we have been informed by DNR with this work that ultimately, if we can address our lead by eliminating it altogether, we will have to do corrosion work, which ultimately means that those chemicals that are added to the water to sequester the lead. And because we're going to be in a position to not actually be able to meet that 10 parts per billion, will be required by DNR to replace 7% of the lead services annually, but that must be on the public and private side. So I just wanted to highlight again, when I made reference to that 15 parts per billion moving to 10 parts per billion, the bolded numbers as you look across our sample sets is ultimately what that 10% was, what that number was. There's only a couple years in which we actually were under 10. The other piece too that I should highlight with this is that as we reviewed our sample sites, we did have some that was allowed at the time to have some of those sample sites be copper, and they then influence these numbers. Going forward, all of our sample sites must be lead services as we sample those. So ultimately we looked at, okay, we know where we're at, we know the requirements that we are looking at here going forward. So the key piece of this is that we have an ordinance in place that allows for the lead service to replace both on the public side and the private side. The ordinance that's in front of you is based on a Madison ordinance, Manitowoc, and Oregon. The replacement is to really address 2 things. One, if we don't actually get the grant in 2021 and able to do remove 100% of the lead services that we know that exist out there, that it provides basically a platform to be able to replace those over a 15-year period, or that 7% that ultimately would be required to do. And then also, I guess a key piece is because we believe that there's a reasonably good chance that we could be successful in obtaining those grant dollars, we're working through for anybody who does actually replace their private side of the lead service to work with a pre-qualified plumber, and they have the potential of being reimbursed for any of those costs that they would incur basically replacing that private side of the lead service this year. So that grant funding that's available through the DNR, it's $60 plus million that's going to be available. It is set up in a first come, first serve. And basically we need this ordinance in place because we can't replace our side without being able to replace the private side as well. If we're not able to obtain that grant, ultimately then there's a 15-year process that this would occur over, and there would be a special assessment provision for that. The key piece I think to take away with the ordinance also is that we consider, and this is absolutely true, if you look at any EPA, DNR information regarding lead, it's a public nuisance, it's a health threat. And so basically we put customers on notice ultimately that they have a lead service, that the health threat is there. They have the opportunity then to object or to not object. If they object, they actually apply to the circuit court. Dane County will then review that case. If they don't object, then we just move that project forward. The cost, we believe at this point in time, if we're able, or we know actually if we're successful in obtaining this grant in 2021, those costs that we incur in 2021 would be 100% grant eligible, because we would be actually administering the entire program. We don't know that for sure on 2020, but doing everything that we can set into place to make sure that those monies are reimbursable to those private homeowners. And then special assessments are for where the grant funding is not available. So going forward, just want to kind of highlight also as far as why we're kind of moving this ordinance in place today, is because really that opportunity for the grant in September is a first come first serve situation. And so we wanted to make sure that ultimately this grant was, or this ordinance was in place prior to basically applying for that grant. Ultimately that grant is first come first serve, but you also have to show the ability when you request the dollars that you have everything in place to be able to successfully obtain what you're looking to do. Right now, we are one of the only communities that is looking to do 100% replacement with this grant dollars. So very excited about this opportunity. We actually had looked at an opportunity like this in the past. There had been previous grant opportunities. However, we were not eligible because of our low to moderate income levels. This grant does not have any of those restrictions. And that's really all I have. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
I have a question or two. Yeah, sorry.
Mayor Swadley? Jill, this is Sid Borsma. I would like to ask a question about basically two questions. One is about how much does it cost for a private individual to hook from a house to our mains?
As far as the cost, so if they were to put the service in brand new?
Yeah, to take out the lead pipe and put another one in.
They would be responsible for that portion from within their home to that shutoff valve, which is that curb stop that sits right about at the right of way. From the research that we've done, we've always referenced $3,000 to $5,000. We did talk really closely with some contractors and actually just to get some budgetary numbers so we could look to what would we be putting forward for this grant next year. And we did have some that were in that range, but we also got some references that could be under that $3,000. So we're hopeful that we get some bidders that will put forward some basically lower costs that we won't be able to be required or need to take as much of those grant dollars.
And the second question is that with the grant dollars, it seems to me that this is benefiting the entire city. And I was wondering whether or not there might be any possibility of having, rather than this being assessed to individual owners who have the old houses, whether that could be assessed to the whole city and have us share that responsibility.
And to that point, Sid, if we are successful in the grant, then basically 100% of those costs on the private side will be covered with the grant. If we're not successful and not able to obtain that grant for some reason, ultimately those dollars, if they're assessed back through, because the benefiting parties aren't all of the residents, it's the benefiting parties that actually have those lead services. So there's a lot of kind of restrictions as far as how that goes to be able to assess that back over all of the customers, because they're not all benefiting from that lead service replacement, if that makes sense.
I'm just thinking about people who now have to tie into sewers with an extremely high expense, and I think it would, if the grants are covering the whole city, and a number of those residents that we should, as a council, consider sharing the wealth.
I think Sid, the city or the utilities portion would be covered by either the grant or all the city residents. The portion that goes from the curb to the individual home only serves that home, so that homeowner would be responsible for that line.
Mayor, that's absolutely correct.
Could I ask when there's an opening, a question or two? This is Riley.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Jill, how is it that, this just kind of a general question, how is it that the lead contamination gets read into the general water supply if it is only affecting those, those homeowners in the private lines? Or is it that we have lead also in our public lines?
We do not, actually. So that's a really good question. And I had a graphic that I had presented before, but I want to provide a little shorter version of this. But ultimately, our raw water contains no lead. There's not lead in our water mains. It's once it gets to that pipe that ultimately is lead, for where there's those lead services, and it has the ability to pick that lead up. To your point, is it's impacting to those homes that actually have a lead service. We're regulated to the tap. So even though that plumbing may be lead and maybe only on the private side, we have the regulation that when the sampling is done, it's actually sampled at the tap.
Okay, so when we are deriving these parts per billion numbers, we are doing that from what, random testing from various taps, or how is that discovered or determined?
Basically, there's a list that we provide to DNR. DNR reviews that list and then selects sites that they would like us to actually sample. What we ultimately do then is we reach out to those property owners. We ask them, we give them a bottle. We explain to them exactly what they need to do. So pretty much what we usually recommend for them is they need to let the water stagnate for 6 hours, because ultimately the greatest quantity of lead is going to be adjacent to that lead service. So they let the water stagnate for 6 hours, then they actually capture that first flush of water in a bottle that we provide to them. They set it out, and then we send it in for analysis.
All right, then if I might too, with respect to the city, do we know with any specificity which residences are currently served by lead pipes, for the private lead pipes? Which residences are affected by this? Do we happen to know?
We do. We do to some degree. When we go and do meter change outs on the water side, we actually do a cross connection inspection just to verify that there's no ability for say contamination to feed back into our system. At the same time, we also take a look at what material is coming in through the basement, what's connected there, if it's lead, if it's galvanized, if it's copper, and then we record that information. We are working on right now of basically, we've kind of got in the older part of the community a sort of I'd say a bubble where those lead services live. And so we're going through and actually truing our information and hydro excavating. So we go to the curb stop, we actually use our back truck, hydro excavate at the curb stop, and then we look at the material that's on each side of that curb stop, so we know what's on the private side and what's on the public side.
Okay, and if I have two more, they'll be quick, I promise you. Can residents request some assistance from the city in determining whether or not they have lead service in their private line?
Absolutely.
Can somebody check that? Okay.
Absolutely.
How do they do that, please?
They can just give me a call, just call the utility number, and we'll get you on a list.
Great.
If we're able to get into the homes, we will check it that way. We can also walk through pretty easily with somebody if they take a look at their service. So if they know kind of from the street side, they know where their service comes in, find their meter, take a look at that pipe. If it looks like the color of a penny, it's copper. If it's a gray color, then it's going to be lead or galvanized. With this ordinance, galvanized is removed as well, because most of pretty much there's always lead and galvanized together, and galvanized can have a potential of holding that lead in place. So if we only remove the lead portion but leave the galvanized, it has the ability to hold enough lead in there that there still could be lead contamination coming into that home.
Thank you. I have one last one, if I might, and thank you for all of your answers, Jill. If we are not successful with these grants, and we're looking at this perhaps like 15-year time frame to be replacing some of these private lines, what do we do in an instance where there is a private homeowner who needs to replace this, but honestly just does not have the resources to do that. What is the plan in that instance, if there is a plan in that instance at present?
There is. So what we will be looking at is basically taking a look at the community, going after these areas and bidding out that work. Ultimately, they would be special assessed for that, but they have the opportunity to be special assessed out to 20 years. And so they would be then, it would be part of their tax bill, and so they wouldn't have to come up with that money up front at all.
Gotcha. Yep, wonderful. Thanks for all the answers. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that question, Alderperson O'Reilly, we do have some potential with, when we do a TIF extension, there's an incentive where you can extend the TIF district for 1 year after closing if you do 75% for affordable housing. The other 25% you can use for anything. And you may recall several months ago, we presented a plan to potentially use some of that 25% for some lead replacement, but we don't feel that that's going to be nearly enough to cover all of them. But as we go through this process, we'll certainly continue to look for grants or any other incentives that we can to help out the homeowners.
Great, thank you.
I have a question, Joe.
Okay.
You were say we don't get the grant, which I think that we probably will, but you're talking about that if we don't replace all the lead, then we have to add this chemical to our water system. And that chemical actually goes to everybody's water system. It's not just the people that have lead. So back to Sid's point about it is a community kind of benefit to replace lead pipes, because then everybody's going to have this safe-ish chemical in their water. And then second question is that if we don't get the grant and we have to wait 15 years till it's all replaced, that chemical is going to be constantly being in our water for 15 years, which we know that it contains phosphorus, which will cost more for us to take it out on the back end of this. So I just want to clarify that.
Absolutely, that's an excellent point. And without this grant, and really without moving this forward, DNR has been very clear that we need to treat the water ultimately. With this grant, we kind of avoid those things. But if we ultimately have to do that, there's a second study that we'll need to do, which we actually goes through, takes a look at our piping, we do a pilot analysis and actually inject that chemical, determining the exact amount that we need to sequester that lead. That study alone is $80,000. We've estimated that annually we would be spending about $55,000 on the water side to treat the water. And your point is 100% correct. It would be through the entire water supply. So whether you had a lead service or not, it would be coming into your water. And then to your exact point is on the wastewater side, we have phosphorus restrictions of what we can discharge. So we would be then working through and removing that chemical again on the other side once it gets to the plant. So it's substantially costly, as well as, you know, the benefit to most of the community isn't there if we don't, you know, basically address this lead. And I think also is that it's good to highlight is DNR has been extremely helpful, extremely supportive in our pursuit of this grant, and has really given us kind of as much of a positive response that they feel that we've, you know, put ourselves in a really good position to be able to obtain these monies.
Alderperson Lagaki, I believe, had a question.
Mayor, you sort of referred to it in case of disaster planning. If this grant is not procured, and boy, I hope it is, and Stoughton has been successful at getting these kinds of grants in time. Jill, do you have any suggestion for homeowners, particularly those of us with these crazy old houses, as to potentially be seeking resources given this problem of lead?
There may be some opportunities out there for them to get funding as well. And then the mayor brought forward with the TIF dollars. I know that Jamin has worked very diligently to create a plan ultimately. So there'd be $1,500 that would be available to help support on the on the private side to be able to replace their lead service. The other thing I would recommend is if you have a lead service, there's a variety of different things you can do. You could choose to drink bottled water, but really, I think the big piece is important to really note. It's about that lead contact, that time in which that water is sitting next to the lead service. So if you think about running your cold water, because you want to run the cold water, even if you're going to fill up a pot of the cooked noodles or otherwise, you always want to, if you've got a lead service, you always want to use cold water because lead's ability to move into water is less if it's cold, greater if it's warmer. And then also just before you put your cup underneath the faucet, let it run. Envision what it was going to take for that water to move from the water main into your home to that tap, and let it run for maybe 15 or 30 seconds. And now you're flushing through all that potential lead water, and now you've actually got out to the main. So there's some different things. There's also we have the opportunity, or will provide actually a filter. It's a pitcher filter, but you can actually then fill the pitcher, put it in the fridge, and then pull water from there. And if you have a lead service, you can contact the utility. If we can verify that, we will provide that filter at no charge.
Thank you very much, Jill.
Thank
Jill,
you.
I have one more question if I could.
Okay, one more question and then we'll try to get to the vote here.
Okay, and then the issue is, for me, is is this all city of Stoughton? Are you supplying any water services for other entities that might be affected in, for instance, the townships?
No, because ultimately it's basically our distribution system. What we distribute water to is ultimately what's impacted by this. It's possible that there could be a private, someone out in the township that has a well, and they may have a lead service from their well, but they're not paying Stoughton Utilities for their water service. So there's not anything that we provide out to the townships.
Okay, so they're really on their own then, if they have an old house with lead services to a private pump.
As far as I know, there may be some programs out there available depending on economic income and different things like that. But as far as connection with the city, with the utility to be able to provide that, we're not in a position to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we have a motion on the table. I think we're ready to vote on it. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Okay, new business. We're at R93 of 2020, and that comes from Public Safety, Alderperson Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. Resolution 93, 2020, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to issue a Class A fermented malt beverage license and a Class A intoxicating liquor license to KPW Hospitality LLC, doing business as True by Hilton, located at 2500 Jackson Street. Paul Harms is the agent, and I would recommend approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Whoever caller 11 is.
That's me, I think. Let's give it to me.
All right. Boy, you went from 3 to, it's hard to keep up to you.
I know, man. I keep on dropping out and coming back, my friend.
Oh, you're like a bad habit. It's okay. We like it.
There you go.
All right. Any thing you want to add, Alderperson Jensen?
Yeah, I got kicked off there for a second. So yes, nothing to add. I don't believe there were any issues. Public Safety recommended with a 5-0 vote on May 27th. So all is in order. So I would move to, as I said, I move to approve.
Is there any questions or comments?
As usual, I do, Your Honor. That is, I would ask Holly, how are we doing in terms of licenses that are authorized for new establishments?
So this license is a Class A license, meaning that so people staying in the hotel would be able to go to the market area to purchase either beer or wine, and it's an original container, and then take it away for consumption, either in the rooms or another part of the hotel. So this isn't a Class B license that has the regulations associated with it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Next item is R94 of 2020. This one also came from Public Safety, Alderperson Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. Resolution 94, 2020, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to approve a liquor license renewals for the period of July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021. And I would recommend approval.
Second.
Second by Alderperson Reeves. Alderperson Jensen.
Yeah, this is a yearly thing. The licenses are coming due on the 1st of July, so this is needed in order to approve them.
Okay. Any questions or comments from alders? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. R95 of 2020 also comes from Public Safety. You guys are busy. Alderperson Jensen.
Yes. Well, I enjoy this, right? Let's see. Resolution 95, 2020, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to approve the outdoor consumption permits for the period of July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2021. And I would recommend approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderperson Riley.
I think that was Riley.
Yes,
Okay.
that was me.
Anything you want to add, Alderperson Jensen?
Again, this is the same thing as the outdoor or the regular license. This is outdoor for the entire year. Public safety approved, 5-0. Everything was in order.
All right. Any questions or comments from council members? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. R96 is Public Safety, Alderperson Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's R96, 2020, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to issue an operator's license to Carly Hogan. And I would recommend approval. Thank you.
Alder Jensen, is that the committee action?
No, it has to be read in the positive.
Ah,
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderperson Riley. Alderperson Jensen, so
Yes.
explain this to us.
Public recommend denial. It was a 5-0 vote. This person was a no-show, and I think if the chief would care to, he can comment on it.
Well, my information is in your packet. The other caveat I put on here is the individual did not show up to the Public Safety Committee, and therefore I would recommend denial of the license.
The only thing I would add is because we have to introduce it as a move to approve, the denial is recommended, so it'll be a no vote for if you follow the public safety's recommendation.
Thank you for the clarification. Any questions or comments from council members? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
aye.
Okay, and then all opposed?
No.
Okay.
Your Honor?
so- Yes,
I was confused.
okay.
I openly admit I would like to change my votes to denial.
Okay.
I misunderstood.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'll try and be clearer next time, Gene.
No, you were crystal clear.
Okay.
I
so
still
that-
didn't understand with this brain.
All right, so that motion does fail. So we'll go on to the next one, which is R 97 of 2020, Alderperson Jensen.
Same thing here, R 97, 2020, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to issue a license, operator license to Jacob Mettinger. And I'd move to approve.
Second.
Okay, and this is again the same thing, public safety recommended denial on a 5-0 vote. Therefore, I had to present it as an approval, and a no vote will deny it.
All right, any questions or comments about that?
If you want me to, I can go a little bit further. Again, this is the same thing. There were some violations that were current, and the chief, based on his standards, was recommending denial of this, and this person was also a no-show.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? All right, hearing none, all in favor say aye. And all opposed say no.
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 Okay, so that motion does fail as well. All right.
I'm done
Thank you
for the
very
night.
much, Alderperson Jensen. Next item is R 98 of 2020. This one comes from Park and Rec, and I believe somebody's going to be here to present. I'm not sure yet. Dan can let Holly know. And this is coming from Park and Rec, Alderperson Caravello. Would you like to introduce us?
I sure would. This is R 98 of 2020, a resolution to adopt the Mant Park Master Plan. And I so move.
And is there a second?
Second.
I heard Hiley or Jensen. Take your pick, Holly.
Take Hiley.
All right, and it looks like we want to make Dan Schmidt the presenter, Holly. If you could do that, that would be wonderful. Anything you want to add, Alderperson Caravello, while we set up Dan?
I think just briefly, we initiated this study to look at future uses and better ways to utilize Mant Park. And I want to thank everybody that offered their comments during all the opportunities that people had to do that. And I want to thank Dan Glenn for all his work on this. And I think it actually presents some very forward-thinking, nice opportunities to utilize Mant Park for all of Stoughton better in the future.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Swadley and council members for having us out tonight. As council member mentioned, this process started about a year ago, or just over a year ago, and to look at the future planning for Mant Park. The process started with some history and analysis of the existing conditions, going through some of the databases, finding park aerial from 1957, noting some of the existing features, the original baseball field in the center part of the park, as well as the Mant Parkway loop that goes up around by the lake, and some of the fair buildings that existed at that time. The current conditions, as they are today, the purple areas are sections that are occupied primarily by Stoughton fair buildings. The kind of orange highlighted areas are some of the more active recreation areas, the existing ball field, skate park, playground, beach house, and Troll Beach. And then the green areas are kind of the existing open space. So you can see through the inventory of the site is, despite it being a large park, there is now a lot of open space in the current setup. There's buildings kind of organized throughout the site. There's not a lot of organization to that. So most of you are aware, but run through some of the existing images. The Ohio River frontage, Mant Parkway. Some of the things that came out of this are having the turf, and up to the river there's a significant goose issue along the northern Mant Parkway, which makes most of that area unusable through a good portion of the year. Existing features such as the pickleball courts, some of the fair buildings, the existing grandstand, the Mant Community Center, Troll Beach, and the existing bathhouse, which is getting near the end of its useful life, as well as the existing park shelter, which and Glenn has told us has not been rented out in the last few seasons because of its low use. Public engagement for this process really started back in 2018 with the comprehensive outdoor recreation plan that was completed by Ayers Associates, and starting to get an idea for the type of features that residents were looking for in some of the parks that they visited most, Mant Park being one of those. If nothing else, for the fair and other large features, it draws a good portion of the community every year. But top proposed uses were nature and multi-use trails, playground space, splash pad, improved restrooms, multi-use courts, picnic areas, and some of those were specific, not just to this park, but others in general, but they do fit well with the same responses we found in a survey conducted in May and June of last year. The process from there, and that's kind of simplify this process, the overall piece, just to kind of keep this presentation short, but had 3 concepts which were presented at a public information meeting in October to get some input, and ranged kind of from leaving the park closer to what it is now to kind of a full revamp. If you could move everything around, what would you like to see? And one of the key pieces that came out of the public engagement were people like the fair. They want to see that stay in some format. The Ohio River frontage and open space were high priorities, as well as that activity core of having some type of playground, splash pad, but also picnic areas and some connection to nature, so it's not all built up in pavement. So the concept that ended up coming out of that is kind of a blend of the 3 original that were presented. It reorganizes the fair building kind of in line with the Mant Center, creating kind of an exposition hall, exposition center. Reorients the grandstand, ideally reusing the existing structure, but moving it so that it's able to open up that larger space to the west. It does add parking in several locations, one of the largest being along 4th Street through removal of the existing ball field. It also adds and works through connections to the RDA site through a pedestrian bridge connected downtown, as well as offering a restroom and turnaround and some possible other amenities that could tie in with the proposed Whitewater Park. So really trying to make this section of the Ohio River and Stoughton an activity hub, and pulling off all the different assets that Stoughton has in those areas. Another main piece that came up in our stakeholder interviews, as well as some of the online survey, was a larger trail system. So there's a proposed trail that loops around the outside of the park, but also goes on to the existing Stoughton School transportation facility site, and also the wastewater site. There would obviously need to be coordination on that piece, utilization of those properties, but there are potential grant funds available to help with those costs and whatever type of security upgrades, fencing, things that may be required for that, to have people walking through those areas. But it does create a more direct connection to the Ohio River in an area that's kind of got its back turned to it because of the wastewater treatment and just transportation facility. So part of the concept is drawing in through that connection, kind of extending 6th Street through a pedestrian bridge and what will be the future RDA site. So you can see these two images, one looking south, the other looking north, kind of the same vantage point of the connection that you see to Bennett Park and its relationship to downtown. The Washington County Fairgrounds was used as an example of kind of what could be the future of the fair buildings, or possibly rebranded as kind of an expo center. There were several comments during our stakeholder meetings that there just isn't a space large enough or to the right facility capacity to do some of the larger events that Commerce could put on if that facility existed. And the Mant Center doesn't quite meet that need in its current format. I'm looking at a way to utilize the fair buildings, which we use a portion of the year. They could also be larger event spaces for events throughout the year. And then the final piece is creating a pedestrian character. So these are some really urban examples, but the pavement areas and open spaces would be multi-purpose spaces that during large events such as the fair, coffee breaks, other festivals and events that may come because of the improvements to the park, provide opportunities for both vehicular travel as well as pedestrian, safe pedestrian travel, as well as bike, outdoor seating, different features like that. Final piece of the process was creating kind of a phasing of, well, how are we going to get to this implementation, and knowing that the overall cost isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It may take 15, 20, 30 years before this full plan would ever see realization, if it does in its entirety. Maybe in 20 years, there's a different vision for what the park looks like, but this sets us up that way. So the first phase would be parking improvements and the trail connections. So looking at improving the Ohio River frontage, modifying the route of the existing Mant Parkway to open up that frontage and turn that into a multi-use trail, replacing the ball field with the parking lot, landscaping and screening so that it doesn't feel like just a big sea of asphalt, adding in that restroom and shelter on the northwest corner that would serve not only as a trailhead for users using the park and the trail system within the community, but also the future Whitewater Park, and then the trail system going around the island or peninsula. And the estimate for that is about $3 million. Some of the character images there show what some of those features could look like. So stone seating or embankments along the river that could be utilized for fishing, putting some native plantings in those areas as well to help reduce the goose population to make that space more viable. Like I mentioned, parking lot in such a way that doesn't feel like just a big sea of asphalt, adding in plantings and stormwater management integrated into the site, picnic areas, and starting the beginning of kind of that urban plaza space around the Mant Center. The existing fair buildings and Troll Beach would be maintained as they are, as well as the grandstand. The second phase would be several years out, looking at kind of the activity core, if you want to call it that. Would be a new beach house, realigning Mant Parkway on the south side to open up additional space between the Mant Center and what would be the proposed fair buildings, adding a splash pad and inclusive play area, as well as kind of an outdoor green event space. You could have a possible band shell or just open green space that could be utilized for movies in the park or small kind of informal outdoor concerts, but just kind of a multi-purpose outdoor flat space would be kind of the northeast portion of that green highlighted area. Phase 3 would be relocation of the pickleball courts and addition of tennis courts or some other type of features, depending on what the need is at the time of implementation. And the final kind of the last pieces would be that expo center and fair building modifications, as well as relocating the grandstand. There could be addition of restrooms and concessions that would tie into the grandstand to be able to utilize that for other events. And we feel kind of pushing it over and realigning it would help with some of the spillover of noise from that facility if it was used for outdoor concerts and things other than the tractor pull and the rodeo and things used to be there during the fair, so that it doesn't have such a huge impact on the nearby neighbors. With that, I know there's a quick overview. I can go back through any other slides, or we can answer any questions if there's anything that any council members have.
Thank you very much. Who has the first question?
I'll take it.
All right.
Dan, with the addition of the larger parking areas in there, is there a possibility that maybe some photovoltaics or something could be installed in there for like electric vehicle recharging stations to better utilize some of that large asphalt area?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Those type of features are usually kind of something that gets picked out in further design development as you start to implement these projects. So there's no reason that those couldn't be added in that format. I can see those either on the west side along 4th Street or in the lot for the Troll Beach area.
Anything else, Brett?
Nope, that was it. Thanks.
All right. Who wants to be next?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Alderperson Hunt.
I was wondering if I could get a little clearer on the calendar on these improvements. When would they, for the first phase through the 4th and 5th phase take place?
I think I would probably defer that to Director Glenn because I think there's some variables, including potential grants, and he has all that stuff memorized. I don't.
Okay.
Well, these are typically 20, 25-year plans. The first phase of the project, I just submitted a grant where we'd be able to complete the improvements in the next 5 years. And it was an 80% cost share. But yeah, these are long-term plans. I read a story the other day of a suburb in the Twin Cities area, and the director there has been there for 30 years, and they finally completed the master plan for one of their community parks.
Okay.
So you're saying that for this total cost of phase 1, if you received the grant, we would pay 20% of the $3 million?
So the way I packaged it actually was with the Whitewater Park and then the RDA site improvements. So the cost would be for all of the improvements, it was like 1% matched by the taxpayers, just based on the state grants that we actually acquired already that we can use as matching funds.
Okay, any further questions, Alderperson Hunt?
Nope, that's fine.
All right, anybody else?
Mayor, I just have, this is Riley. I have a typo I'd like to correct because it offends me. It doesn't really offend me, but I like to say things like that. Okay. It's in the resolution portion. It currently reads that the Man Park Master Plan for the City of Stoughton is hereby official adopted. Of course, that really needs to read officially adopted unless I'm mistaken and have lost my mind. And I don't think either is the case.
All right, thank you for that. Anything else you want to add?
No,
All right. Any other questions or comments from alders?
I do.
Alderperson Boersma, and then I didn't hear who was after him, but we'll figure that out.
It's Hirsch.
So Dan, is there any way that the city could make some money on this new master plan for Man Park? I know that we can't charge anything for a public waterway, but what is your intention in terms of having this kind of be paid for out of some funds that the city can receive?
I don't consider any of the improvements in Man Park as a revenue source for the city. It's just like a public park like any other place. I mean, Troll Beach obviously is a revenue generator for the city, but pickleball courts, I mean, the fair is a private entity. And then there's parking and a trail system. Those aren't revenue generators.
Anything else, Alderperson Boersma?
No, it would be nice if we could have some kind of consideration for the city, for this to be, self-paying, or paying for itself over time, rather than the city just contributing money to it, not having any revenue source. It seems like it's taking money rather than being very beneficial for the city itself in terms of finance. I mean, I'm concerned about finances for a $2.5 million project.
Sure. And, I would say that I think as we get through the various phases, there'll be some opportunities, more than likely through some of the nonprofits, to host events there. And the nonprofits have been real generous, to support our efforts in the area of Park and Rec, especially. So some of that money may come back indirectly, but to your point, it's probably not going to be any revenue. But as we try to, attract families to move to Stoughton and make Stoughton a destination place for people that want to do things in Dane County, I think these are the type of amenities that people are looking for, and they do come with a big price tag. There's no doubt.
Well, just it's small money, but something like we do rent out our shelters for events for people. I think we should just keep it in mind that there may be some sources that we can get at least some money back out of a project that's going to cost a lot of money. I think we need to be innovative on that because we just have a lot of projects that are beneficial for maybe the whole city, but don't establish much for the coffers of the city itself.
Sure. And I think our focus right now has been to get the plan done and then concentrate our efforts on minimizing the costs through the grants. But certainly, as we exhaust those resources, I think at some point we have to transition and see if there are creative ways for us to, create enough revenue to at least maintain the sites. And I think that'll be an ongoing challenge, but I think it's one that, we should, we'll have to focus on at some point. Council President Hirsch, you were next.
Thank you. I just want to put a shout out to all the community members and different stakeholder groups that actually spent time with MSA and Parks and Rec Committee to actually share their ideas and visions for this park. And I want to thank MSA for listening and kind of taking those ideas and creating this master plan. I think it kind of embodies everything that I heard from the stakeholder groups, and and what the community wanted. So I commend them, and I look forward to this coming to fruition. Of course, you know, if it takes 25 years, I'll be very old and gray by then. But at least in the first couple of the phase one, I hope to enjoy. So I look forward to these changes. This park needs a big facelift, and this gives a great vision. So thank you.
Any other alders have questions or comments? All right, here none, we do have a motion on the floor with one minor change on the word officials. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Thank you very much, Dan. We appreciate you coming out and or being on here tonight and your presentation and the work that your team did.
So, thank you as well. Thanks for having us. It was a pleasure working with you all.
Excellent. All right. Next item is item number 14. This one comes from the Finance Committee. Alderperson Schumacher.
All right, earlier tonight, the Finance Committee met to go over the results from the general obligation notes sale that we had for the 2020 CIP projects. We had originally authorized 2.44 million for that one, and after the we set this one up a little bit more unusual in that it was done on a late day in the week bidding to increase the competition on the bid for that, and it worked in our favor this time as it was 2.415 million, so we saved a little bit of money that way. For the rest of it, I think I will turn that over to Jamin for the great details that are on this one.
Okay, and while we're setting Jamin up to be the presenter, do you want to make a motion?
Is there do we need a motion to accept it, or is this just in reporting?
Nope, we're already locked into this one, so no motion needed.
All right, did I stall long enough to get you set up? And Holly, can you make Jamin the presenter?
Okay. Okay, so I won't go through the entire report, but as Alder Schumacher said, the sale was successful. We did do this a little bit different this year where we set the parameters maybe a month ago. And basically the idea behind that was the council set the parameters that these issues had to be within. And if they were, then I could sign off and we could issue the debt. As Alder Schumacher pointed out, we were able to reduce the borrowing by about $25,000 as a result of the premium bid and lower costs of the issuance. The key here is that this actually came in with a true interest cost of about 1.1%. So we're basically with the premium and the low interest rate, we're basically getting 2.5 years interest free. And over the life of this debt issuance, we're paying 1.1% in interest. So very successful. I think we'll continue to look at this type of sale in the future. If you do have some time, you can go ahead and read through this. It's pretty straightforward, but all in all, very, very good news for us. And the credit report is also attached as well too. So if you want to read through that, Moody's actually had some pretty good things to say about us. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
From the Finance Committee's point of view, I thought that this worked out really well and that we didn't have to rush to make decisions and then rush to present this into council for approval. So I certainly support doing this type of sale in the future for this. Just makes things a little bit easier and you've got time to think about it.
All right, any questions on this one? Otherwise, Holly, you can turn the screen back over to me if you'd like, or we can put the next item on the screen, which is item number 15, which is discussion and possible action regarding the remote meeting policy, remote access policy. And this one went through the CACP. So I'll turn it over to Alderperson Hiley to introduce the motion.
Sure. Let me pull that up here.
It's on the screen if you can see, we shared it.
Yep. So in the CACP, sorry, I'm gonna pull it up where I can actually read it.
All right, and then you can make the motion and we'll get a second on it and then you can go through it.
Yeah, so we wanted to make some modifications to this given our current situation. Currently, we have to waive the rules disallowing remote access every time we're doing these. So this makes kind of simplifies the policy around that. So I will move to approve this.
I'll second that.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Anything else you want to add, Alderperson Hiley? And I think Attorney Dragney might have a few words for us when you're done.
I'm good.
Okay. And I think this is looked at maybe as a temporary thing until CACP and the city attorney can work on something more permanent. Alderperson or Attorney Dragney, did you have some comments?
Briefly, Your Honor, yes, I think that this change is fine to address kind of the immediate issue that we're dealing with. I do think that it would be helpful to spend a little time digging a little more deeply into how to deal with these issues. The way, there are really kind of two things happening that have to be addressed by the council. One is, how and when will the council resume meeting face-to-face? And this policy doesn't really speak to that. And when that time comes, when meetings are held in person again, what, if any, what kind of policy makes sense at that point for individual members of the council who would still like to have the ability to appear by phone, for example. So I think there's more work to do on this, but I certainly think adopting this policy tonight will at least deal with the immediate need to not have to amend the rules at every meeting.
Okay. And I would imagine this will be on for CACP at the next meeting. And if you wanted Attorney Dragney to participate, or I think we would have to at least give him the date and see if he's available, or somebody from his firm.
Otherwise, out of CACP, I had agreed to take the action to look at this a little bit further. I can also confer with Attorney Dragney by email about at least some of the thoughts that he has on it.
Okay, appreciate that. Any questions on what's in front of us tonight?
I do.
Alderperson Boersma, and then Riley after that.
I think
Yeah, thank you.
I think in this pandemic, we have two different groups. Actually, one is a fairly at-risk group, which is older people and those with some underlying health conditions. And so I was anticipating some kind of plan where we could do both, where there could be both a regular meeting, but have some of the alders available the way we're doing it just now. And that's what I would like to see in a policy in the future, because I think this is going to be with us for a while.
Okay, so CACP will take that up for consideration when they're doing the recommendation. Alderperson Riley?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just kind of a picayune point here, but why not? The last sentence here isn't really relevant at the present time. In other words, if a member is unable to attend a city meeting, they must contact the city clerk, blah, 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 by noon. That really isn't relevant at present, given our current circumstances. So I trust, even though it's there, we will all ignore it religiously for the present under the emergency rules.
Oh, we'd
Why
still like to know,
contact when we,
we'd still like to know whether or not you're able to attend virtually. And I think Alderperson Hiley has a comment as well.
yeah, go ahead, because I'm reading attend as in person, because that's from the old language. So if I'm misreading, then I'm misreading. Thanks.
Yeah, I think how we had read that is that if you're unable to, be present as part of the quorum, you should let the people in charge know.
Right.
We had also talked in CACP about kind of the logistics of returning whenever, say, Dane County regulations allow. And the council chambers are big enough that we could spread out the council in there, but we would not have room, say, for public forum, a public audience or that sort of thing. And those are the sort of considerations we're looking at. But there'll be a lot of discussion put into that in the future.
Okay, thanks. If I might comment just briefly on that, Mayor.
Yep.
Why don't we use the term then for now? Why don't we use the term to be present instead of the term attend? Because we didn't change anything there, but the circumstances have changed. That's old language. I think Alderperson Hiley's term to be present is better than having the term in there to attend. I think to attend would indicate you're there physically. That's all.
Anybody have any objections with that?
I don't think that's any clearer, but I don't object.
Well, I do, so humor me.
It only takes one, so that's fine. We aim to please.
Good.
All right, so we can make that change. I don't know, do we need an amendment to do that, Matt, or is that? You're muted, Matt.
Sorry, do we have a motion pending?
Yeah.
I suppose there should be either, there should be an amendment, motion to amend.
All right, Alderperson Riley, you want to do that?
Sure, thank you. I would move that the final sentence of this particular resolution, or whatever the policy of the remote access, be amended to read, if a member is unable to be present for a city meeting, they must contact blah, 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 instead of attend. Attend clearly in my mind means you are there. Present, you can be present in any number of manners. So I think present is a better term. I think it should be used for now, given the current circumstances. There you go.
I'll second that amendment.
All right, and there's a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. That takes us back to the original motion with the amendment. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion as amended, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. All right, thank you. Next item is number 16, and this is discussion and possible action regarding replacement of lead service laterals during DOT reconstruction on Main Street. Director Weiss, I think you want to walk us through this. I don't know if we have anything to put on the screen for this one.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually don't, although I probably could. Yeah, that might logistically take me a little bit, but
why don't you walk us through us and explain what's going on here and what we're trying to accomplish? I know Attorney Dragney can help with this discussion, and then we'll see if we need to make a motion or what we want to do after that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So just kind of wanted to give kind of a background as far as how we find ourselves where we're at today. Back when there was a lot of discussion regarding the DOT project, in November of 2018, my understanding is at that point in time, the utilities decided that it wasn't worth, there was additional monies that would be required for us to go and replace water and wastewater at the plant on Main Street project with the DOT project. So it was decided not to move that forward. As a result of that, you know, we had really no involvement with the project other than DOT checking with us for a variety of different things. When we exceeded in 2019 on the lead side, we started to look at our 15-year plan because at that point in time, we did not know this grant opportunity was available to us. Really figured that the DOT opportunity to do any work there on the utility side had passed. And so didn't explore that any further, but we did start to look at a couple of things. DOT does potentially anticipate coming back and doing more road work through that corridor, potentially in 7 years or longer. And when we looked at a 15-year plan, the other thing we looked at is right now there's double mains within the Main Street corridor, and looked at, okay, we could also look at replacing water main in the terrace. Problematic, difficult, but it would avoid us from digging up the street. When the grant opportunity came forward, we started to actually look at what other options do we have available to us. Is there some way in which we could find funding for home filters for these properties? Is there a possibility it wouldn't actually meet the requirements of the, or it wouldn't be grant eligible, but is there a possibility that we could look at lining these lead pipes? We didn't want to leave these, you know, this group behind as we looked at, you know, what opportunities do we have for that work. Just kind of move forward then. Very recently, we were actually having a pre-construction meeting out there. We were doing some of our lead checks on a variety of properties. Some of those were on Main Street. And actually, we came across a water leak. And as we started to talk through that water leak that we had on a service there, we started to kind of step back and think through the fact that what we recognized for consistency and when we've exceeded in 2014 and 2019 on the lead side is those were always years that just prior to that, there was construction activities occurring in that area. So we also thought, okay, well, if there's a variety of reasons in which that would occur, so construction activities, even doing water main work, potentially there's a lot of causes that could create that lead level to increase, but we thought, okay, let's, before we get too far here, if there's a concern, and we do potentially have a concern that those lead levels could go up in this area with these construction activities, should we at least have a discussion with DOT to see if there's any possibility of us replacing these lead services? We discussed that with DOT, and kind of to my surprise, I must say, they were actually receptive to the possibility. One of their main concerns ultimately was that there would be an impact to schedule. And one of the big pieces I would say with the schedule is ultimately we had requested, the city had requested that we were done before school. So they're kind of their cutoff date for the detour ultimately was August 28th. The construction schedule actually, Pre-C Construction is actually the contractor on this project, and their time frame for this work to be done in this specific area was August 4th. So we talked through the possibility there's some opportunity in that schedule for some work to be done. After those discussions met internally, so Mayor Swadley, Planning Director Scheel, Finance Director Friedel, Public Works Director Hebert, and our City Attorney Matt Dragney, we all kind of sat down and talked through, you know, what situation are we in at this point in time? DOT is willing to at least have the discussion. Is there some possibility here that we could address the situation, given the fact that we do have this health concern? So we started to kind of walk through that, and I don't want to speak for Attorney Dragney, but he looked at a lot of different options, because basically that project is actually started. The contractor, Pre-C, has started to kind of work towards it. They actually plan to close that section of road June 22nd and plan to basically have that addressed and buttoned up by August 4th. So we talked through it, said, well, at least it's worth having the continued discussion to see what opportunities still exist. Also worked very closely with Finance Director Friedel and walked through, okay, what monies might we have available to actually do this work? We walked through that and we're at about 130,000 or so that could be reallocated within the budget on the water side for potential work out there. Reached out to Parisi Construction and asked them ultimately, is this work that you would have the ability to do because of the schedule on this project? Really, they would have to be the contractor to be able to be doing the work because they basically control the schedule. They said that they had the ability and the bandwidth to get the work done. They felt that the impact to schedule would be probably about a week, maybe not at all, but they said, well, it could be a week. Recently, they said maybe it'd be slightly more than a week, but they're also recognizing on the work they've started already, they're ahead of schedule. So there's some opportunity there as well. So I guess what I wanted to kind of talk through is, our situation that we have very specific concerns related to construction activities occurring around lead services, the potential for lead levels, at least temporarily, to elevate, and to basically work with Parisi Construction to put forward basically a contract that we would have with them. One requirement, though, is that the council would need to approve that contract. They would need to approve also that this was a declaration of emergency, that this was ultimately emergency work that needed to occur. And then also look at that budget dollars with that of the 130,000. The Parisi has provided us with, say, line items as far as what the cost will be. We are right now at about 130,000, but we haven't actually finished truing what properties out there have lead services. So that's assuming that all the properties that we still don't know for sure if they're lead services or not would be considered to be lead. So it's looking kind of at the worst case scenario. We're right about that 130,000. That is concerning. There is potential for soil contamination through that corridor. We don't anticipate right now that that'll be an issue because there's 2 sites in there and those both were closed. The other thing is that something else unforeseen comes up and that there could be a schedule impact. As part of that, DOT has said if there's a schedule impact, there is a requirement ultimately that they have a municipal agreement that the city council has already approved. They would like an additional line added to that, ultimately that the city council would accept the fact that going forward with the work could impact schedule if it doesn't create a situation where DOT incurs additional cost. Ultimately, the city, the utility would cover those costs. All that said, I think that we all feel, I don't want to say there's no risk. I think we, based on the schedule of August 4th to the 28th is basically an additional window. I think we feel reasonably okay that we will be, we won't run into any issues there. We've tried to explore everything we possibly could on the front end to ensure that that doesn't occur. But I think there's a little bit of risk here that we will, that potentially the schedule could go longer, that we could potentially go over the 130,000. But I think based on the situation that we're in, I think that it's a calculated risk based on what we know. I don't know, Matt, if you have anything that you want to kind of talk through more from that declaration of emergency or process.
Just a couple of things to add. So the council won't be asked to take action tonight. You're not being, this is really to kind of lay out what the situation is and tell you where this could go and the options that we could present to you at your next meeting. If and so what you would be asked to vote on if the council wants to move forward with this would be first adopting a resolution that would declare that there's an emergency that requires us to enter into a contract with Parisi without following the public bidding laws. We're not going to be able to publicly bid this contract. And the only way that you can really not avoid publicly bidding is if there is an emergency, there's an emergency basis that allows for that. So that's one issue that that you would have to address if we come back and present this to you. So that would be one item, declaring an emergency that justifies not following the public construction laws. Second, you'd be presented with a contract between the city and Parisi to do this work that's being described, and apparently also an amendment to an existing agreement between the city and the Department of Transportation. Remember, the work that's being done on Main Street it's a DOT project and a DOT contract. right now. And so what we're really trying to do is find a way to enter into a contract with that contractor, Parisi, as a city, to say, while you're doing the DOT work, we'd like you to do this additional work for us, replacing these lead service laterals. So tonight, the opportunity is first for us to lay out the situation for you. And I think the agenda does give the opportunity for the council to give some feedback on this. If the council, I think it might be helpful for Jill at least to know whether the council thinks it's worth continuing to try and put together this package where there would be an opportunity to get the work done, knowing what you'd be looking at. If on the other hand there are serious concerns about taking this approach, I suppose it would be helpful to know that as well. But you're not being asked to take make any final decisions tonight on this.
I have a comment, if I may.
Go ahead, President Hirsch.
Sure. First off, I mean, I appreciate this coming forward because two things. If the road is already being ripped up for the DOT project, I mean, it just seems prudent to replace our lead laterals as opposed to then having to rip up the road next year once we get the grant to replace it. So it seems that it's cost effective and prudent. And then my second question is, if we're replacing those lead laterals when the DOT is working, say this all goes forward, would we also be requesting the private landowners at this point, I think with this new ordinance, to replace their lead laterals in hopes that we get the grant that then they would be reimbursed? Is that correct?
I think there's an opportunity there both ways. We ultimately have to put those property owners on notice, which we will very much notice those property owners that the public side will be replaced and give them for sure the opportunity to choose to do that. As far as whether I would say that that's a piece that hasn't been totally worked through for 2020 because the timing of the Prospect Street project was such that we didn't feel it would be appropriate to notice those individuals because of the timing of the ordinance, because that project has already started. Now, a number of them are choosing to replace their lead services on their side, just regardless of the ordinance piece, but felt that given our time frame for implementing our 15-year plan was 2021, that we would actually start noticing in 2021. Because a piece of the ordinance ultimately is that we have a project in place where the private side would be ultimately bid by us. If they choose to do it on their own, they could definitely set themselves up to be eligible through that pre-qualified plumbers list. But given where we're at in the time of the year, it may be problematic for us to get all the pieces in order to be able to notice them, get a project in place, get that bid out, get that work done. And then also we have the special assessment piece for that.
Okay.
So I have a question. And that,
Go ahead, Alderperson Boersma.
and that is for Jill. Does that, so the grant definitely would grow what retroactive to those people on Main Street?
What we're working on right now is our ordinance is set up that ultimately the work that is done on the private side, once those property owners are noticed, is actually a project that we oversee. We would bid that work out, and then ultimately they would be either special assessed or the grant dollars would cover that. Right now we're working, because there's kind of two ways in which you can be grant eligible, and we're kind of looking to take advantage of both pieces of that. You can also set up a pre-qualified plumbers list, and the property owner ultimately basically selects a plumber. The only piece of that is concerning, and I've never been able to totally get an answer on from the DNR, is that they make reference in all of their grant documents of a local say total cost. Now, if we bid out the work, like we're going to in 2021, that is all eligible costs. Those will be covered 100%. But when they look at a pre-qualified plumbers list, they make a reference to either that it can be possibly all covered, or they may set a cap. So there's a possibility that they may set a cap on these ones that we're going after for 2020. The one benefit to that, though, is if the cap is set, which I suspect there will be. They have never said exactly what that number will be, but I do anticipate that there'll be a cap. It could be, say it's $3,000. If the service is more than that, we do also have those TIF dollars of $1,500 that could help then cover up that difference for those private property owners.
So there's no guarantee, although it sounds like it's probable that we could grandfather those people in, correct?
Correct.
All right, any other questions or thoughts or, we're kind of looking for some direction. I mean, we can continue the process and bring it back in 2 weeks unless council members feel that we really don't want to pursue it.
I would like us to pursue it. I think it's prudent and a wise use of our money. And if it doesn't cost us more to pursue it than it is to actually get it done, then I would say go for it.
I would agree with Regina.
Okay, anybody have a different opinion?
No, I agree as well, and also purport that, a declaration of a state of emergency, all kinds of states of emergency going on. I think it's important for us to offer clear definitions and plans to our folks. And so for those reasons, I thank Jill and Stoughton Utilities for bringing this forth.
Okay, so we'll keep pursuing it. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the stars align and everything works out. And if it does, we'll be back in 2 weeks with some sort of a motion to make or a resolution or something to that effect. Anything you need, Matt?
No, we're good for now.
Okay.
Well, I had a question, Mayor, and that is, it would come from utilities. Does utilities have to take this up?
We do, Sid, and we actually have it planned. Depending on what the result of the discussion today, we have our meeting on Monday, and so it'll be brought forward to them on Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next item then. And that's going to be, if I can find it here, Resolution 99 of 2020. And this is another one of them emergency orders that we talked about. And so I think what I'll do is I'll maybe have Attorney Dragney, you want to just kind of walk us through this? I mean, it's another declaration of emergency. We had one initially with the COVID, and it expired. And once it expired, that's why we had to, do the whole thing at the beginning of the meeting in order to allow the meeting to be virtual. And then for what we're trying to do on this next item, we're trying to do that under the emergency order. So therefore we produced a new one. I think, anything to add to that, Matt?
Just briefly, this is a declaration of a local state of emergency based on the combination of the public health emergency caused by the coronavirus and the economic consequences that have now begun to emerge as a result of that public health crisis. And the purpose of this resolution is, if it's adopted, is that would then give the city the authority to exercise emergency powers, which will lead into the next resolution that's on the agenda.
So normally if a restaurant wanted to do outdoor dining, they would have to have a conditional use permit and a site plan and present it to the planning commission, which meets once a month. And the cost of that would be over $700, which, given what's going on in the world right now for a restaurant owner that's already feeling the effects, that's obviously not very reasonable. So that's why we're proposing to do the declaration and then the following resolution. Are there any questions on it? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion for this declaration.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I think I heard Lagaki and Caravello. Any discussion on the declaration? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, that carries. So that takes us to the next item, which is the actual outdoor dining. And just a couple things to note, and Attorney Dregney, you can help me fill in the blanks here. My understanding is we decided to do this for all restaurants in Stoughton. I know the initial request came from the downtown restaurants, but we felt there was really no reason not to expand that.
That's right. I'm actually going to let Rachel speak to this resolution.
All right, Rachel, you get to make your debut.
All right. Make sure I'm still awake. So, yes, this resolution is established to allow for outdoor dining in sort of expedited circumstances for any restaurant or bar that's located in the central business district or the planned business district. Would you like me to explain other pieces of it?
If you'd like, you can just highlight maybe some of the key things and then we'll see if there's any questions.
Sure. So I think the important thing you already touched on, Mayor, is that right now the way that current Stoughton ordinances are set up is that it's possible for restaurants and bars to have outdoor dining, but they have to have that approved as part of their conditional use permit, and in the area that would be used for outdoor dining needs to be part of their site plan. And we're assuming, based on the requests the city's received for giving some exceptions to that, that we have restaurants now that don't meet those requirements. And so this is set up to temporarily give some reprieve from those requirements, and also to address the fact that some spaces may need to extend into public rights of way onto public sidewalks, and there are no provisions right now in the Stoughton ordinances that allow for that. So this would cover both circumstances, either outdoor dining on the premises that's owned by, you know, the private property, or in the public right of way. It does require that at least 5 feet of public right of way be maintained in an unobstructed, just be unobstructed, so that the public sidewalk is not interrupted and people can still safely use the pedestrian right of way. What this doesn't do is change any of the alcohol beverage regulation. So as it's currently drafted, alcohol consumption would only be permitted outdoors if the property is already a Class B licensee, and the license description, like the premises description in the license, includes that outdoor dining area, and then they also obtain the outdoor consumption permit. And I think the final thing that I would want to highlight about this is it's set to expire on the same date that the emergency declaration is set to expire. So I think my understanding of where we are now is that this is meant to be an opportunity for outdoor dining over the summer, and then the council can consider whether to come back and create a permanent ordinance to deal with outdoor dining in the future if everything goes well.
All right, and I just wanted to say for myself that Attorney Snyder knocked this thing out as quickly as I can ever remember any piece of work done. Sorry, Matt. I was.
No, you're right. You're right about that.
So I was really impressed by that. We had some initial conversations about going this route, and then once we did some research on what the cost and timetable would be from the conditional use permit and the site plan, and based on some feedback we received from some business owners, we knew we had to go in this direction. And once we made that decision, it was just amazing how quick this came together. Is there any questions or comments from any of the council members?
Will Rodney and Michael have the bandwidth and or extra resources in case a large number of these plans come in at one time?
Well, this week it'll have to be Michael, but we've talked about it. We've tried to make it as simple as we can for everybody, including our planning department. So they're prepared to deal with it. So, we'll do what we can to support their efforts. I expect that we'll be getting some communications tomorrow morning from some of the business owners. And as Attorney Schneider pointed out, there is a separate process for alcohol. And if you want, we can touch on that tonight, or we can talk to the individual business owners as they call here. Do you have any questions on that part of it?
I do, Tim.
Okay, I'll let Holly kind of run us through that, and then Attorney Dragney and Schneider can help fill in the blanks if necessary.
So under current state statute and under the proposed resolution, any changes to serving alcohol would require a premise description update or an amendment. So establishments would need to notify us of the change in premise to allow for alcohol outside, and that would need to be approved by the council, as well as the outdoor consumption permit.
Is there an additional cost for that, Holly?
Currently, we don't have any fees associated with amending a premise description or for the outdoor consumption permit.
And would that have to run through public safety, because the next public safety meeting isn't until after the next council meeting?
Typically, yes, we would run all licenses through public safety for recommendation to council. I believe the council could change that if they wished, but that's typical practice is to send them through public safety for recommendation to council.
And then Attorney Dragney and Schneider, if we wanted to consider just bringing it right to council, would we be able to do that under this emergency order? And could we do it on an individual basis, or would we'd have to let everybody do it as requested?
So I think this really speaks to the council rules, and I don't have them in front of me. So if the council rules require that something be referred to committee first, then the council can waive that. That's a waivable requirement. So the real question is, who's going to put it on the agenda? And so, Mayor, you could choose to put something on the agenda, and whether the council rules allow it or not, and then get it in front of council, and then the council can decide to either consider it at that meeting or refer it back to committee.
And I think Alderperson Jensen probably knows the rules better than anyone.
Yeah, that would be my thought on it as well. It could simply just come to council, we could waive the rules with a simple vote and consider it that night.
And we didn't want to do that tonight purposely, because we wanted there to be an opportunity for council members and the community to think about this and whether or not that's a place we want to go. I'm not really sure if Chief Luck has any thoughts about it now, or maybe he will in a couple weeks, because that would be some uncharted territory, at least for me. And I don't know what people will think about that. It might not be a problem. It may be an issue for people. And I think that's something that I'd at least like to have a couple weeks to chew on.
Yeah, and this is Matt. I just want to suggest one thing we have to think about carefully is if a premises description is amended unconditionally, then that's permanent. And so if there is a concern about, on a permanent basis, amending a premises description to include an outdoor area, then I guess we'll have, if the council's position is it's willing to do that on a temporary basis, but not a permanent basis, we would have to determine whether there's a way to kind of by agreement, for example, make that a temporary premises modification. That would require some additional work on the front end to be ready to do that. So I don't know if the council, it's not really on the agenda tonight, but we'll have to speak ahead of time to be ready for that.
So I know Alderperson Legaki has a question, and if anybody wakes up tomorrow morning and has any thought about this, this particular item, feel free to reach out to us so we have some direction. So go ahead, Alderperson Legaki.
Many thanks to the people who are working diligently to get this forward. And I definitely want to know what the business owners are thinking, and listened to Cale's comments representing the downtown businesses, but perhaps they might be a resource for us in this. What are they thinking and looking at during this time? And is it influencing their long-term viability as a business, what they're thinking of how they want to operate? And so I find myself wondering if we can look at waiving the rules for temporary things, and if someone's requesting something more permanent, that we show that we're listening to that and deal with that as at that time. And then one of my questions was just for business owners, is there a timely factor to this? When we think about our council schedule and maybe referring back to committee, that's time passing, and might we need to think about more urgent virtual meetings to help them with this?
Yeah, and I would assume that we'll probably get some feedback from business owners either tonight or the upcoming days here on this particular item. And that's one of the reasons we really didn't want to include that into this. We wanted to keep it simple. We explained initially when we received the request that there would be a separate process for alcohol. And the feedback we received at that time was, go ahead and do what you got to do to allow us to operate outdoors. And then we'll take that on as a separate issue, was the feedback we received. So that's what we presented.
Thank you for doing that. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so where are we on this one? Do we have a motion?
No.
Does somebody
I
want to
move
make
to
it?
approve.
There's a motion
I'll
by
second.
Reeves, second by, I think was it Caravello?
Yes, it was, sir.
All right, any more discussion on this one? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Thank you. And thanks for your work, Attorney Dragney and Attorney Schneider. Next item is R 101 of 2020, which is a special resolution condemning racial injustice and hate and strive for racial equity. And this one comes from CACP. I'm going to let Chairperson Hiley is going to introduce this one.
Sure. So we brought this up in CACP last week. We didn't have the actual text of the resolution to approve then. We drafted that in between. So this actually hasn't been approved by CACP, but we thought, given how important the things going on in our country right now are and how fast everything is moving, that it would be appropriate to bring this to council right away. So if there are things you see in the language, it's because it hasn't gotten necessarily as much scrutiny as a normal resolution may have. However, we do feel that this is extremely important to show that we as a city want to make this a better place for Black Americans and Brown Americans to live, where we have to acknowledge that Wisconsin is the single worst state to grow up as a Black person. And we have to do whatever we can as a city to mitigate that, reverse it, and uplift the people that have been oppressed.
All right, so would you like to make a motion?
I will make a motion to approve this. And will we have to waive the rules to vote on this? I'm not clear on that yet.
No, it's on the agenda. It's not an ordinance, so we can vote on it tonight.
Fair enough.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderperson Doom. Any discussion on it?
This is Riley, if I might, just one thing, a suggestion anyway. Can you hear me?
We can.
Maybe
Go
you can.
ahead.
Hold on a second. Oh, you can. How groovy. Because I mute often, because I might be saying something inappropriate. I don't want it heard. In this instance, the only thing I think this is really well done, and I appreciate it. The one thing I would suggest, unless I'm missing it, is in the 1, 2, 3, 4th whereas from the last, perhaps actually adding without adequate access to, and the laundry list here, healthcare. Because my God, that's a real problem, and it might not be a bad idea if it's an acceptable amendment to add the term healthcare with respect to those things that those communities do not, well, frankly, more than those communities, of course, but those communities in particular do not have appropriate access to a quality healthcare, however one would want to articulate that. That's it.
That's an amendment?
That's a friendly amendment request, and I don't care if it's not acceptable, then it's not acceptable.
I heard a second from Alderperson Riley, so I'll take it as an amendment in a second. Any discussion on that?
Thank you.
All right, hearing none, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
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 Any opposed to the amendment? So that takes us back to the original resolution as amended. Any discussion on that?
I had a question about some of the wording, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Alderperson Hunt.
In one of the whereases, it says the council acknowledges that many of these iniquities are still encoded and enforced in our laws, policies, and government at every level. Does encoded mean that the laws exist with the intention of creating racial iniquity? I mean, I'm not certain that encoded is a word that I would say describes the circumstances. I mean, there may be existing individual instances of racism, but are they actually encoded? Does the law actually try to create racism? I feel like that word is a bit inaccurate.
So I did write that clause, and I did word that intentionally. I do believe that, unfortunately, bad actors in our governments do write laws, especially to cut Black people out of voting. We saw just in Georgia today, they had an absolute disaster of an election. Seems to be a theme for this year, where minority precincts had absolutely no chance of having a real chance to vote without standing in line for hours and hours and hours. I think that word is certainly appropriate in the way that I used it.
And
I agree.
And I did express the same concern, because when it says at every level, that includes us. And I'm not saying there's nothing in there because there could be, but I would like to think that if it is, it's unintentional, unless I'm being naive. So that was my concern with that same language. Obviously, we're going to look at that and make sure that we don't have anything in our policies or our ordinances or on any of our job descriptions and those types of things. But this assumes that they are in there and they're purposely in there. So I have to say I did take a little offense to that, but certainly I appreciate the spirit of the resolution as a whole. So that was just my personal feeling. Others, may have different opinions. I'd certainly like to hear them. Alderperson Reeves, were you up next? Maybe
No, I
not.
just said I agreed with Alderperson Hiley.
Okay. Anybody else?
Are you not hearing me?
We heard you.
Okay.
I guess, and I guess I need clarification. Now you're, Alderperson Hiley, are you saying that our city of Stoughton has purposely encoded and enforced these inequities in our laws, policies, and government at every level? I mean, I need to know if you're talking about in general, because your example was in Georgia, but do you have an example in Stoughton? Because if not, like Mayor Suave, I take a little bit of offense to that, because I think we try to be equitable in everything that we do, and nobody's ever pointed that out in our resolutions or ordinances, and I acknowledge that we should relook at that, have other sets of eyes that are more sensitive to that, to look at that. But I guess if you're not specifically talking about Stoughton, that needs to be a little clarified. And if you are, then I would like to change the word that the council acknowledge that there may be inequities encoded and enforced in our laws, policies, and government, because to admit that we have them intentionally, that I've been in council now for 5 years, that I intentionally did this, is like I said, it's unnerving, because that's not who we have been. So I'd like, some clarification on that wording.
Certainly, it's I could probably talk for way longer than anyone wants to hear about that, and way longer than I should talk. But I think that it's not that Stoughton is intentionally at this point still trying to write laws to keep people down, but we have laws, say the war on drugs, that we do still enforce in ways that I feel are unjust and outdated and based in racial animus. It's not that Stoughton wrote those laws, but we're as a local police force, we have people enforcing them. So I'm talking structurally, but we have to acknowledge that we as a city are part of that structure, and I think that's where I'm standing.
Okay.
May I?
Yes, go ahead, Alderperson Lagaki.
Thank you very much. This is a policy that I am pleasantly surprised how near and dear it is to my heart. And the events of the last weeks have been very unsettling, but yet at the same time, when we experience crisis, it's a time of opportunity. So I just want to, if council will give me a little latitude, try to personalize this point. When we were writing this, I too was a little uncomfortable with that. But I also would like to just speak a little bit of testimony and show how all of these things somehow fit together in this, hopefully what will become a seamless garment where we're not separating others. But when I first moved here to Stoughton, I never imagined I would be able to legally marry my wife, my partner of many years at that time. And within 8 years of moving here to Stoughton, it happened. And we had an amazing ceremony here. When we married, there were 1,132 rights and responsibilities with that legal marriage that now became available to us. And I couldn't believe the impact. We never would have thought about creating a small business because we didn't have the legal protections as two people who were separate by law. And oh my God, the things that stood in our way when I was advocating for domestic partnership registries so we could get on each other's insurances. When I say we, I mean lesbian and gay people as a whole back in the late 1990s in the city of Milwaukee. There were things on the books in the city of Milwaukee and in the next suburb that you would not believe how we had to patchwork together just to try to get to the sense of equality and have shared health insurance through our employers. And so these levels that this comes to is big. And what I've listened to these weeks of our fellow people of color, Native Americans, Chinese and Americans being discriminated against for starting the virus, my God, I'm hoping that we can take a stance. And boy, it does affect all levels, either by acts of omission or acts of commission. But it happens, and I'm not going to bore you with the details of over the years of being a lesbian woman who simply wanted to establish a home and help build a better community.
Thank you for sharing that.
So
Your Honor, might
thank you.
I make a comment? I'm sorry, Gene, I apologize. I didn't mean to
Nope.
interrupt.
No, and
Okay.
thank you. These are some challenging times, and I appreciate you guys letting me speak and giving me the latitude, because the one thing I want us to do is listen and include. And I was given that chance 20 years ago, and I can't imagine the speed by which some things have happened for LGBT individuals. It's time to make this happen for other populations that are experiencing such difficulties. And so thank you very much. I don't apologize. That is passion. But let's get to work and let's do this right, and let's include us all. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Alderperson Riley, go
Your
ahead.
Honor, thank you so much. One, Gene, that was as lovely as it gets and moving. And thank you for those comments. Really, that was just a beautiful thing to hear. With respect to the matter on this language, I look at it more, and I think a council person highly kind of references, I look at it more as a general term. You know, I don't think this is saying, my God, Stoughton, boy, you've got a long way to go.
No.
Boy, look at all the horrible things you do. I think it's a general statement. And I think as a general statement, it is true. It is not true of every particular jurisdiction. It is not true of every township, city, whatever. But damn, it's true. So I support the language as it's currently articulated. I do not perceive it as something that is a slight against Stoughton in particular. So I support the way it's drafted.
May I make a suggestion into the wording that would make it maybe perhaps a little bit more clear? If we were to place, so it would be inequities are still encoded and enforced either implicitly or subversively. Finish the sentence.
So you want to discuss that, or you want to make that an amendment, or what would you like to do?
just open it for discussion at the moment.
Okay, anybody have any thoughts about that?
If that clarifies that more.
I would
I
have,
like
This
your,
is what, Ben. Sorry.
Mayor Swadley, this is Greg.
Go ahead, Greg.
I happen to agree with Brett's, hopefully he'll make that amendment. If he does, I'll second it.
I like that language, Brett.
I'll put that forward as an amendment. I would like to amend that whereas statement. Breaking into the line iniquities are still encoded and enforced either implicitly or subversively in our laws, policies, and government.
I'll second.
All right, I might have to look up to 2 words to fully understand what they. Sorry.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you sit next to the attorneys for a year.
Yeah.
Hey,
don't
blame me. Too.
Okay, anybody have any comments or thoughts about the amendment?
I'm curious, this is Riley, as you probably know by now. I'm curious if Alderperson Hiley has any particular thoughts on the suggested amendment.
I think that it makes clearer what I was trying to say, so I'm in favor.
Okay, beautiful.
Excellent.
Thank you.
That's how it's supposed to work. Nice job, you guys. Any other comments? All right, hearing none, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you for bringing that up, Alderperson Hunt. It takes us back to the original motion as amended. Any more discussion?
Mayor, this is Matt. I have a comment on something.
Okay, and then when you're done, Alderperson Hiley has a comment as well.
Okay. So my comment is in the at the resolution itself, the second paragraph. The second paragraph currently reads, it says, directs city departments and other agencies to use available tools to assist in the elimination of racial and social disparities and so on. And I guess my comment is that I'm wondering if the intent here is not to issue a directive at this point, but rather to express a commitment that the council has to work with city departments and other agencies on these issues. If indeed it is intended as a directive to city departments, I'm a little concerned about the fact that there's not, it might be difficult for departments to understand what the council is asking them to do, given this language.
And Alderperson Hiley was next, so I'll let him comment, and I know Alderperson Hirsch will be on deck.
Okay, I kind of agree with the attorney here that maybe it's more appropriate to bring that portion back into what we're planning to do on Community Affairs Council policy and have more clear directives and plans. But I wanted to touch back on the process we had a little bit ago, that if we as 12 relatively privileged white people on council here, if we don't feel uncomfortable at points in meeting this moment, and it's like it's a breaking point in a decades, centuries long history of race here. It's not just a a single person that has died, though every one of those is egregious. If we're not feeling uncomfortable at points in this, we're doing it wrong. And I had something else that I'm blanking on, so
We'll come back to you. We'll go to Alderperson Hirsch, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you. I also had, I'm looking at my notes on this resolution. One with under the therefore, the Community Affairs and Policy Committee pledges to develop strategies working with city leadership. I'm assuming that's internal leadership. I guess I would like to amend it, city leadership and community members to end racial
Yes.
disparity in Stoughton. So I'd like to add that because as Elder Lagaki keeps pounding, and this is something that I've always believed in, working in teams and community, that you have to involve the community to really understand what they're going through and their ideas for change, instead of being city leadership thinking that we know everything and shutting it out to the community. We need to actually get their input and strength. And so maybe what comes of this is that there is a subcommittee that from CACP that is similar to the downtown revitalization committee that involves a good portion of community members that we have identified or they've come forward and want to be part of it. So we can actually have a subcommittee that actually their whole focus is coming up with ways that we can work on this in our community. So
Okay.
I would like to make that amendment to add and community to end that. So with city leadership and community members. So I'd like to put that amendment out there.
Okay, we can put that out there, and I just want to ask a quick question. Do you think there's a way to consolidate 1 and 2, or do you think those are 2 separate things?
For me, I think number 2, and then Ben and Jean and Brett, who actually put this together, can speak to it, but I think number 2 is what number 1 is going to tackle. And so it's kind of redundant, hopefully.
And,
I'm happy to comment on that if you'd like me to.
Sure, and then I know Alderperson Boersma, and then we have to get back to Hiley at some point, and Attorney Dragoney may have thoughts.
And I also have an amendment on the floor, so.
Well, we didn't get a second, so we can do that, or we can, whatever your pleasure is, we can go for a second, or we can finish this conversation and come back to it.
Whatever.
Second.
I heard a second. So we do have an amendment on the floor to add that language. So Holly, did you catch that?
Yes.
Okay, so can you just read that as amended, Holly?
So as amended, the resolution would read, the Community Affairs Council Policy Committee pledges to develop strategies in working with city leadership and community members to end racial disparities in Stoughton.
All right, does that capture it, everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed to that amendment? None opposed. Okay, so do you want to discuss number 2, or are you okay with it?
Well, didn't we need to change the word direct?
Well, that's kind of where we started, and then we went to the other one and did the amendment. So I think we should probably go back to number 2 and find out if we wanted to change that. And I think, did you have an opinion on that, Alderperson Reeves? I think Lagaki did for sure.
Well, I just think the commitment of, I'd be looking, I'm fine with considering other language, but I think direct, as Attorney Dragney suggested, might not be appropriate. So I'm open to another, for those that have worked directly on this, I'd like their suggestions.
Did you have something, Alderperson Hiley or Hirsch? And I know Boersma had some comments as well, so I'll give you guys first dibs since you drafted it.
Well, I didn't draft it, but one idea that I had would be that the city departments, and then I would put a comma, committees, standing committees and other committees would use, use available tools, blah, blah, blah. Instead of we direct. Just change it, but that's just one idea. Because I don't know what other agencies they're talking about that we actually have jurisdictions over. So if that could be
Okay.
clarified, that'd be great.
So one suggestion that came up in my chat would be to encourage. Is that strong enough for you?
I believe, this is Jean. I thank you guys. Excellent. This was a hard one to write during a hard time. All of those suggestions are fine because I really believe that what we're doing here is we're really making a declaration. And this is, as Regina, I appreciate your conversation earlier with me as we were all being true to our moral code around not having meetings. We had to be very tricky with this. And so that was also covering this a little bit. I'm thinking that Ben earlier mentioned, we are just fine. I can't speak for Brett too and Ben, but if we wanted to bring these resolutions, the therefores, back to our committee, for us, excuse my language, privileged individuals who are elected to office to write this, knowing that we plan inclusion, that all of these therefores, trust me, they are important, but yet our real work is coming. So Ben suggested maybe bringing these back to committee, which I think would be just fine. And let's maybe just approve this statement. And maybe we choose to send these therefores to committee so that we can really do it justice and not just try to come up with the right thing tonight.
So what I was saying there is that I think that what we plan in CACP is going to cover what we're saying in number 2, but that not necessarily we want to throw the language of these back to the committee.
Okay.
I can make one other suggestive edit in there that might clarify that just a little bit more. If you were in the number 2 point, if you were to strike the words directs and other agencies to strike those words out of there so that it reads as, therefore be it resolved by the City of Stoughton Common Council that city departments use available tools to assist in the on and on.
Nice.
Is that acceptable?
Yep. Brett, do you want just the city departments or do you want committees and to also do that?
Well, this is.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. So, you have to remember the council, all of these departments work for the council. If you are issuing a directive, to your staff and to your departments, it's important that they understand what they're being directed to do. And I think it's not clear at all to me what they're being directed to do here.
Are you talking about the tools or the initiatives that are included in there, Matt?
I just don't know. If I was the head of any department and I was on the receiving end of this resolution, I would not know what I'm supposed to do. I think it's not at all clear to me. But it is in fact a directive from the council. And so we'd have you directing your departments to do something without very much guidance.
I do that all the time.
I think what we might want to do is simply strike number 2, knowing that we have the intention to have clear direction wrapped up in number 1. I'll make a motion if people think that sounds sane.
Second.
Yeah, I support that.
Yep.
Okay.
Agreed.
All right. Any discussion on it? Hearing none, all in favor of that amendment, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention. Okay. So what we have is we have the original motion as amended 3 times.
So I had a comment, and I haven't been recognized yet, Mayor. So.
Okay, sorry about that. Certainly you can comment. So we're back to the original motion. There's 3 amendments. If anybody can't remember what they are, I'm sure Holly does. Go ahead, Alderperson Borsma.
Okay, I think there's such a lack of clarity on this, and we've been at this for now going on 15 minutes or so. I think you should go back to committee and come up with a more legitimate sort of statement about this whole thing. Because I think, we're just going through amendment after amendment, and I would move to table.
Okay, so there's a motion to table. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
And there's a second. There's no discussion on a table. So we'll have to take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 And those opposed?
No.
No.
I
No.
believe the noes have it. So that takes us back to the motion as amended 3 times. Does everybody understand what the 3 amendments were?
Nope.
Your Honor, can Holly repeat them, please? I think I know, but why not, if that's okay?
Certainly.
Sorry, Holly.
Sorry, my microphone wasn't on. Okay, so the amendments were to add healthcare in the 4th paragraph, where it says, whereas Black and brown populations are more likely to live in areas without access to adequate transportation, employment, nutritious food, and pathways to home ownership. That was the first amendment. The second amendment was to add in the 6th whereas, where it says, whereas the council acknowledges that many of these inequities are still encoded either implicitly or subversively enforced into our laws, policies, and government at every level. The third one was to add down at the bottom in number 1 to, I can't see it right now, but to add and community members. So directs the CACP to pledges to develop strategies in working with city leadership and community members. And finally, the last one was to strike number 2 under therefore.
Thank you.
All right, so that's what we're voting on.
Excellent.
All right. Last chance.
Just
Hearing
one
none.
more thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Just wanted to shout out all the people who have been organizing and demonstrating on Main Street these past 2 weeks.
Aye.
Okay.
It is
all in
making a
favor-
difference.
Sure.
Could I ask about one more piece of wording, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
In the second whereas, I believe, or the third whereas, where it says the Black and brown populations in Wisconsin are far more likely to be victims of violent crime. I wonder, is it inclusive or exclusive or accusatory to add the words "than white residents" and rather just read it as are far more likely to be victims of violent crime and are overrepresented in the state's population, etc. There are other populations, other ethnic groups, other than white residents, who may not experience the same discrimination as Black and brown people, but I feel it's unnecessary to identify white residents in particular. I would raise a motion to strike those words.
All right, so there's an amendment to strike the 3 words. Is there a second?
I second.
A second by Boersma. Any thoughts or discussion on that one?
Jean Legaki here, Alderman Hunt, Alderperson Hunt, thank you for catching that. I was actually looking at research from the Pew Research Race in America 2019 report and took their excellent information. And as I look at this policy this resolution that we are drafting, that is counterintuitive to what we want to do. I totally support that language change. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean.
Anybody else have any thoughts? All right, hearing none, so all in favor of this amendment, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, that carries. So that takes us back to the original amendment. The original motion is amended, I think, a record 4 times. Is that a city of Stoughton record?
That's what happens when you legislate from council.
Hey,
We can do better than that. Come on.
but it's good work, and it's necessary work.
Mayor, may I
I just have
comment?
a comment. I have a comment here.
Alderperson Boersma and then Wadaki.
Okay, so I'm gonna abstain from this because I really do think that needs some language changes. I think it's important that we do it with amendments. Hard time keeping up. Maybe it's me, but I will be abstaining.
Okay.
I think there was a comment on our chat that the amendment that we just did, which, I just want to acknowledge that this person says you are making a comparison far more likely than what? If we don't have a ban, then what are we comparing it to? So I know we just changed it then white residents, but is it not grammatically correct? What is the point then of, this is what, I'm just reading this chat comment, so I think we should bring it up for discussion of, Jean, you had go ahead, Ben, or Matt.
Nothing.
I have a thought on that comment, if one would like to hear it.
Most definitely.
Who's up? Who's on first?
Go ahead, Alderperson Riley.
Thank you. We don't have the term "than" any longer in this pursuant to the amendment from Alderperson Hunt. It is just merely stating as a population, they are more likely to suffer this than any other population. I think Alderperson Hunt's suggested amendment was well taken and was approved. So we're just saying basically that this group of people is subject to this more than any other group of people. I don't know if group, forgive me if that's really a pejorative term, but I don't think we need a comparison. We're just saying that this is a fact. We're removing that. So there's no longer a need to further define who else is not the subject to that. Everybody else is not subject to that.
So can I comment?
Sure, go ahead.
That is, I agree with Matt. And, I don't know if I was an employee of the city, I would not, or a supervisor or manager, I wouldn't know what I needed to do with this whole resolution. I think he's got a great point for us. And I wouldn't know what to do. So.
Well, we're no longer providing providing direction as amended.
Yeah, we took that part out. Any,
Yeah, but we're still in a situation where this will go, to like, what do we do? What do we do? Do we change our rules, and what rules do we change? It just seems like we're in a quagmire right here.
I think what will happen in practicality is, we'll discuss this tomorrow at our leadership meeting. I've already had one meeting today with Chief Leck and Lieutenant Conlon and a community group that's interested in helping. I know there's going to be other people in the community that's going to be willing to work. And my point that I made today is, the city can't do this alone. This has to be a community effort. And we have to have buy-in from everybody, because if it's city driven, it's not going to get us as far as we want to go. It needs to be community driven. And I'm hoping that the resolutions and proclamations and everything else we did tonight will help motivate and encourage people to join us in our efforts.
I wanted to make a comment before and just thank council and anyone who is on the line listening. You got to see us make sausage, which we really like the taste of it, but nobody really likes to see it being made. And sometimes it's not pretty, but I just want to honorably quote Dr. Martin Luther King about the urgency of now. And I would like to direct us to the very first statement of this whole resolution, and that is the whole point: a special resolution condemning racial injustice and hate, and to strive for racial equity. That is what this is about. I thank you guys for putting up with the amendments and emotion, but I think that hopefully other members of our city are seeing our commitment and our feelings about all this. And so thank you all. And I'm hoping that we can vote on this.
All right, so we're still on the original motion as amended, unless there's anything else. It was amended 4 times. I think everybody understands what they are. So last call on this one. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
I abstain.
And 1 abstention. Any other abstentions? All right, thank you very much. I know it's hard work, and we're excited to get started.
Move to adjourn.
For a second?
Second.
Second by Jensen. All in
Thank you
favor,
all
say
for your hard work.
Aye.
Thank you everyone for the dialogues, especially when they're tough.
Good night, all.
aye. All right, all in favor for adjournment?
Merci.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you all for their comments and chats, all your community members. Thank you for staying with us all night long to get to this point. Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bonne nuit.